Part 51. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Gongzi. Chapter 501. Staying at an inn in Xianghe County, Zhongli Jiju also brought hot water, but after taking off his clothes, he could see a black handprint on the peaks. This brat. Zhongli Jiju stood by the bathtub and glanced down. Her face turned red and white, and she felt uncomfortable all over. She stepped into the tub, raised her hands and rubbed her body with disgust, looking like she was aggrieved and angry. Just rubbing his hands on his body a few times, the personal experience of last night flashed back in his mind. A man's deep kiss. That unruly thieving hand. It was so dark last night that I couldn't see anything, and all that remained in my mind was the feeling I had at that time. I was hungry and cold during the day, and Su Buling was by my side again, so I had no time to think about those things. Now that I was sat in the warm bathtub after eating and drinking, the thrilling feeling came to me unconsciously. As a living person and a woman, it was impossible for Zhongli Jiju not to feel anything at all. After thinking about it for a moment, she felt that her face was red and she couldn't rub it anymore. Instead, she hugged her knees in annoyance, buried her chin in the water, and stared at the petals floating on the water. Were confused and I didn't know what I was thinking. Twitter. The little sparrow, which was finally able to rest in the room, had eaten and drank enough. It fluttered around the room twice and landed on the top of the screen. It looked down at the master who was trying to drown him, tilting his head and looking at him suspiciously. Zhongli Jiju had no best friend to talk to and fuss about. After sitting in the bathtub for a while, he turned his head. Hey! After all these years of raising you, I've been bullied and you don't even know how to give me any advice. Bird, chirping, chirping. Zhongli Jiju might have been holding back all his thoughts and had nothing to say, so he complained to the bird. You asked Ningyu and I to work together to steal the apprentice, what should we do now? The apprentice didn't get it, and he took advantage of it. How can I get married if my innocence is ruined? Bird. Zhongli Jiju folded his arms and pondered for a while. Seeing that the bird was silent, he continued. I can't really compete with Ningyu he for a man. I'm not the kind of woman who does everything she can. If Ningyu he knew about this, she would definitely think that I was seducing Su Buling, but even if it's cheap, that guy took over. We can't just treat it as if it never happened. Why should I suffer the loss of being dumb? The little sparrow definitely doesn't understand the meaning, but it can be seen that the master is struggling with it all year round. After standing on the screen for a moment, he suddenly flew to the stool, rummaged through Zhongli Jiju's dress, took out a copper coin, and dropped it on the edge of the tub. Zhongli Jiju blinked, looked at the copper coin held by the little sparrow, was silent for a moment, raised his hand and took it. Okay, I'll listen to you, let God make the decision. I'll fight with Ningyu to grab a man from the front, but I'll treat my back like a dog chewed me. From now on, I'll forget about it. Under the gaze of the little sparrow, Zhongli Jiju held the copper coin, took a deep breath, and then flicked it with his fingers. Buzz. The copper coin rose into the air, spinning rapidly above the steaming tub, rising to the top and falling again, with its front and back sides intertwined. Zhongli Jiju stared at the copper coin closely, her bright cheeks showing a slight nervousness, as if she was complaining about her recklessness, or worried about the consequences. There are only two sides to a copper coin. If you are worried about seeing one of the results, you must already have the other result subconsciously. Snap. The copper coin fell on the white palm and was held tightly. The little sparrow jumped a few times on the edge of the tub, poking its little head, as if to see what the result would be. But Zhongli Jiju held the copper coin with his right hand flat, without opening his palm to check. Time passed little by little, and after being still for a long time, Zhongli Jiju let out a slightly frustrated breath, threw the copper coin into the bathtub, stood up and put it on. Clean skirt. After a while, Zhongli Jiju, with wet hair, wearing a long aqua dress, holding wound medicine, gauze and other items in her hand, came to the door of Su Buling's room, raised her hand and knocked. Su Buletinling. The room was very quiet. After a while, the sound of water splashing was heard, and the man's calm voice sounded. Miss Jeju. Wait a moment, I'll put my clothes on. Zhongli Jeju waited for a while, but before being summoned, she opened the door and saw Su Buling standing by the table, putting on her robe. She had just taken a shower, and the water stains on her body had not yet been wiped off. The water droplets slid down her muscular back, showing a sense of beauty unique to men. Stop wearing it. Let me change your dressing. You will have to take it off later. Zhongli Jeju closed the door with her shoes, with a lukewarm expression. She came to sit down at the tea table in the room and put the medicine and gauze on the small table. Su Buling was wearing pants, which were a bit thin but not too revealing. Seeing that Zhongli Jeju didn't mind, he was naturally not shy. He picked up a towel and wiped his hair, sat down on the chair next to him, and said with a smile. Miss Jeju is interested. In fact, I can do it myself. After taking your wages, this is what I should do. I'm a moral person, and one code should be treated as one. Zhongli Jeju picked up the small bottle containing the golden sore medicine, dragged the chair to Su Buling's side, leaned down slightly, and looked at the wound under his ribs. Su Buling couldn't restrain himself from taking advantage of the girl last night. Naturally, he didn't act too hastily when he saw the opportunity. He spread his arms and sat down without squinting. However, Zhongli Jeju had just taken a bath and changed clothes. She wore a looser skirt. This time, the skirt of her clothes was slightly open. At an angle that would not make her look condescending, she could clearly see the collarbone and semicircle under her neck. As the saying goes, a gentleman does not bully the darkroom. Su Buling should have averted his gaze and not take advantage of the darkroom, but the faint fragrance of orchid was overwhelming, the room was quiet, and there was nothing else to see, and his eyes were still confused. He took a few more glances as he was told. Zhongli Jeju lowered his head and applied the medicine without any precautions. His hand movements moved the skirt of his clothes, and the sultry scenery disappeared and appeared, and he said calmly. Su Buletinling, are you and your master doing something ambiguous? Su Buling's expression froze, he calmed down his absent-mindedness slightly, and chuckled. Why did Miss Jeju say this? You still want to lie to me? I already know. No wonder I'm so nice to you. I've given you dragon locks and helped you take care of your baby aunt. You still refuse to accept me as your teacher. It turns out she's blowing the pillow behind your back. Wind. Su Buling saw that Zhongli Jeju seemed to really know and was not lying. He shook his head and smiled, don't tell anyone about this. Master Lang and I have already agreed to be our concubine for the rest of our lives. Zhongli Jeju snorted lightly, I don't care what you do, I just want to ask, do you have a conscience? Why do you keep me by your side when you have made up your mind not to become my teacher? How are you doing? What's on your mind? Miss Jeju has superb medical skills and is indeed of great use to me, so you want the horses to run, but you don't want to give them any grass, so you draw me a big cake and hang me up, and then use me as free labor. Miss Jeju is overthinking, I don't mean it. Then what do you mean? Zhongli Jeju raised his eyes, looked at Su Buling, then lowered his head to treat the wound again. You don't want me to be your teacher, but you want me to give you all your money to teach you. Do you really think I care about your little money? I need money, and there are plenty of ways to earn it. I can make money just by selling dragon locking goo on the black market. I've lived a good life for 10 lifetimes, why should I follow you? You're so good looking. Well. Su Buling opened his mouth, but had nothing to say. Zhongli Jeju bandaged the injury under his ribs, sat a little closer, treated the sword wound on his shoulder, and said almost to his ear. Su Buletinling, you don't want to marry me, do you? As the fragrant wind blew across his face, Su Buling felt that his bones were lightened by 2 ounces, and he blinked. Well, not long after we met, I asked Miss Jeju if she was suitable for marriage. Zhongli Jeju snorted softly, you have a beautiful idea. I am from South Vietnam. I don't care if your Prince of Daia wants to marry me, right? Okay, just treat it as a marriage proposal. You can talk to the village. According to the rules of South Vietnam. When Su Buling heard this, he naturally had to seize this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity and said with a smile, this is natural. There will be no shortage of 3 matchmakers, 6 certificates, 8 sedans, etc. Zhongli Jeju made a sound of cut and shook his head, that's the rule of you Central Plains people. We don't have this in South Vietnam. In our village, women are the masters of the family, and men are all laborers. If you want to marry me, you have to follow the rules. This is the rule. That is to say, from now on, I will be the master of the house. If I am happy, it will not be difficult for you to take a few more small gains, but they must call me the eldest lady. Su Buling's expression as he listened carefully froze slightly, and he shook his head simply. How is this possible? The princess is not the leader of the village. It involves the stability of the 12 states of Ziliang and the balance between the major clans in the Central Plains. I can't just let others do it just because I like it. Zhongli Jeju took the gauze, hesitated for a moment, walked around Su Buling, almost hugging Su Buling, and inadvertently rubbed her cheek against Su Buling's chin. Well, actually, our village is not unreasonable. In this case, it makes sense to be the second child. The elders should not make things difficult for you. Su Buling was a little overwhelmed by the teasing, but it was not easy to act like a hooligan when talking about serious business. He sighed lightly and shook his head. Not even the second child. Xiang'er is Xiao Qi's sister, so she must be of the same mind. You all know this. Zhongli Jeju squinted his eyes slightly, tied the gauze slowly and continued. Yes, I almost forgot about this. When the time comes, you go explain it to the village and see if the elders agree. If they agree, I will accept the 3rd child. The 3rd child can't do it either, Aunt Lu. Are you even planning to marry your aunt? It's not like I'm my biological aunt, I still have master, and the 4th child can't do it either. Manzi and Yuffa will come first, and the 7th child. Bah, get out of here. Zhongli Jeju couldn't stand listening anymore, threw away the gauze, and stood up, you can go to South Vietnam to propose marriage yourself. I won't marry you even if we agree. Do you really think that if you kiss me, you will have to marry me? Do you want to marry me? There's no door. He said without looking back and walked out angrily. Su Buletinling's expression was awkward. Go ahead and chase him. It's hard to explain. At the moment, he could only shrug his shoulders angrily. The 7th one is King Yi. Fortunately, I didn't touch Chu Chu, otherwise you would have had to rank as the 9th one. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 502. After a night's rest in the inn, we set off again the next day and arrived outside Faniang County in the afternoon. After the evening episode, Zhongli Jeju seemed a little unhappy and stopped talking to Su Buling. She rode in front of him, looked back from time to time, and then snorted. Even the little sparrow who wanted to hitchhike on the head of the chasing horse was called back, as if to draw a clear line. Su Buling led the horse to the West Market Street, thought for a while, quickened his pace and walked to Zhongli Jeju's side, smiling brightly. Miss Jeju, in fact, the princess is just a title. For me, the people around me are not high or low, far or near. Zhongli Jeju took 2 steps away from the outside and frowned, saying, who wants to be a princess? You are so beautiful. You can tell the village about this. Anyway, the village will agree and I will not agree. You can dream. Su Buling also felt that he was a little thick-skinned, but he was telling the truth. At the moment, there was nothing he could do except smile helplessly. Zhongli Jiju tilted her head and looked at the street, not wanting to pay attention to Su Buling. However, she did not disbelieve Su Buling's attitude of treating everyone equally. Maybe in Su Buling's heart, the women around him were indeed treated equally, without any distinction between superior and inferior. But all men in the world are the same. They want to treat the girls they like equally, so as not to lose one and not be able to enjoy the happiness of having two wives. Although Zhongli Jiju has never been married, she is naturally good at fighting for the wind and getting jealous, and she knows the rich and powerful houses in this world very well. The master may indeed treat everyone equally, regardless of the concubine or the main house, as long as they can serve people. They are the little sweethearts and little cotton-padded jackets, but the women in the back house don't think so. Even in the palace, there is monogamy and multiple concubines. The status of the main wife is unshakable. If the power of her family is stronger, no one dares to say anything if she manages the master. Other concubines serve the master at night and have to please the eldest wife during the day. They have to look at people's faces everywhere, so they can bully the younger sisters who come in later. So, the number of the elders after entering the house is a big deal about how to live in the second half of life. As a result, she took the initiative to find out the truth last night, and Su Buling said the seventh elder. There are 6 elder sisters above her. Isn't this obviously bullying? Although she was born as a woman of Jianghu and her family is in South Vietnam, she is still a clean woman. Whether it is calculated by age, seniority, ability, or appearance, it is unfair to be the 3rd or 4th elder. How can she call little girls like Manzi and Yufu elder sisters? Zhongli Jiju was so angry that she couldn't sleep all night yesterday. She had some thoughts, but now they disappeared directly. What's so shameless about such a man? Let Ning Yuhi enjoy it by herself, Women's hearts are like needles in the sea. Su Buling couldn't figure out what Zhongli Jiju's attitude was now, but she didn't turn hostile after taking advantage of him, which meant that there was progress. At the moment, he just thought that Zhongli Jiju was being arrogant. The two of them came to the small street behind the West Market with their own thoughts. Su Buling came to ask Zhongli Jiju for an explanation and let the unruly news dealer pay the price, but the scene he saw shocked him and Zhongli Jiju. The cold wind swept the snow on the street, and several brothels and wine shops were closed, making the already depressed street look even more dilapidated. The old inn in the middle of the street was still open. On the wooden pillars with wine banners and lanterns, there was a rope hanging down. A young man was covered in blood and was tied to the rope by his neck. The toes were still dripping with blood, staining a pool of dark red marks on the snow, which had already frozen. Zhongli Jiju paused and recognized the young man hanging on the wooden pillar. It was Li Lin who sent her news a few days ago. Lu Wu, the owner of the inn, was still lying on the recliner under the eaves, but his appearance now was not much better than the apprentice who was hanged. Blood was dripping from the ankles and right wrist, obviously the tendons of the hands and feet were cut. The eyes were closed tightly and blood was slid down the corners of the eyes. The ears and mouth were also oozing blood. I am afraid that the ears and eyes were pierced and the tongue was cut. Only the left hand was left holding the purple clay teapot. From the action, it can be seen that he was not dead. This. Zhongli Jiju was terrified. Although he had seen many dead people in the world, he was still shocked by this inhumane scene. Blinding the ears and eyes, cutting the tongue, and cutting the tendons of the hands and feet were far more cruel than killing people directly. The feeling was chilling just to imagine. Su Buling frowned and was also a little surprised. He came here to kill people, but he didn't have such a revengeful mind. Making the innkeeper and the waiter look like this didn't seem like revenge, but more like a punishment, or a declaration to the outside world. Su Buling led the horse to the front of the inn, raised his head and looked at the corpse on the pillar. It was full of holes. I don't know how much torture he suffered before death. Looking at the eaves, Lu Wu was indeed not dead, but his ears and eyes had lost their perception and did not react at all. Inside the door of the inn, there was a brazier burning, and a young waiter was sitting at the door to warm himself by the fire. Su Buling took a quick look and recognized the young waiter. He was the waiter who often accompanied the shopkeeper to warm himself by the fire and chat at the Yuela Inn in Huangqiao town. When the waiter saw Su Buling and Zhongli Jiju, he hurriedly took a wooden tray from his side with a plate of silver on it, walked out of the door and came to the two of them, saying with a pleasant face, "I really treated the young lady badly. This matter is a bad apple in the Yuzhu Jianghu. The uncles and aunts on the road have cleared their doors. I will take over the Fanyang County city in the future. This silver is the compensation paid by Lu Wu, and my shopkeeper also paid some." The news about the young lady was that the apprentice Li Lin took the initiative to sell it to Yankai Villa. Lu Wu has been rooted in Yuzhu for 40 years and has never broken the rules. I hope the young lady will be magnanimous and let it go. Su Buling heard this and understood the meaning. The news about Zhongli Jiju was secretly sold to Yankai Villa by Lu Wu's apprentice. The local news dealer in Yuzhu had received the news and came to clean up the house and arranged for the apprentice from Yuela Inn to take over. Su Buling had some experience with people in their profession, just like Mr. Chen Si from Chang'an City. He sold out his employer's information and had his whole family killed according to the rules. Therefore, he would rather have a conflict with the Wolf Guard than talk to Renai Hall. The Jianghu people spread the news. Zhongli Jiju's being sold will make the entire news dealers in Yuzhu lose their trust. The whole family who have bad rules must be made public, so that people in the world can feel free to come to them for business. But it was not Lu Wu who made the mistake. Lu Wu had been in Yuzhu for many years and had some seniority. The owner of the Yuela Inn in the adjacent Yuyang County asked for help to see if Zhongli Jiju was willing to let the matter go. If Zhongli Jiju accepts the death rules and refuses to agree, then he will have to kill everyone according to the rules. Zhongli Jiju knew these ironclad rules of the world, but this was the first time he encountered them. Seeing that Lu Wu, who had been in contact with him 10 years ago, met such a miserable end, I felt a little uncomfortable. After hesitating for a moment, he raised his hand and took the money. "Thank you all for helping me seek justice, but, just kill Li Lin, there is no need to do anything so extreme." The shop clerk sighed and said calmly, "The rules are the rules. They are for people in our industry, not for girls. I will be very grateful to girls for being so tolerant." Zhongli Jiju held the silver and hesitated for a moment, not knowing what to say. She nodded, turned, and left the street. Su Buling led the horse and walked beside him, looked back at the body and Lu Wu lying on the chair, and thought for a moment. There are good things in Jianghu, but it's too extreme. Speaking of which, the law is more just. Zhongli Jiju poured the silver into the bag on the side of the horse, shook his head and said, "The government is unjust. People sue the officials without asking the reason. The barefoot people will never win against the squire except for the squire. It is better to deal with it properly. Officials protect each other and no one cares." Su Buling did not deny this. This is how the world is. It is said that the prince broke the law and the common people were guilty. But if he really broke the law, some people dared to report it to the officials, and no government officials dared to punish him. If not, there would not have been so many angry and blood-splattered people. 5 steps thing. This is the framework of the world. Unless Su Buling wants to wipe out all the privileged classes including himself, there is no point in talking about it. Walking out of Fanyang County City, Zhongli Jiju saw that Su Buling had not spoken. She thought that Su Buling, as the prince of the vassal, was overly concerned after hearing her words, so she immediately spoke again. "I mean that Dao's court is not good, but I'm not saying that you are not good. General Su Lai was born as a butcher and came from a poor family. Although he had a fierce reputation back then, he was very down to earth to the people. South Vietnam has been occupied by the Central Plains since ancient times. People bullied people, soldiers and horses came and went, so your Sioux family's army didn't go to the village to grab food girls, but the killings were really cruel. I heard the old people in the village said that they were so scared that they hid in the mountains, and even the village was full of people. I didn't dare to go back, but when I returned to the village after the soldiers and horses had passed, I found that the crops were still there, and no one even took the clothes hanging outside. Su Buling recalled and chuckled, "My grandfather wanted to rule the world and not treat the people from all over the world as outsiders. The other generals were attacking cities and territories in the enemy's country, so naturally they would not treat the people of the enemy's country as human beings. They had different ideas. It's the same, but the way of doing things is naturally different." If Zhongli Jiju realized something, he thought about it for a moment and glanced at Su Buling. "What about you? If I attack your village? How dare you? Believe it or not, I'll poison you to death." "All right." Su Buling knew he had said something wrong and raised his hand to apologize. Seeing Zhongli Jiju's fierce look, he changed the subject with a smile. "Miss Jiju, I trust you very much. You always threaten me with poison. Over time, I will be on guard. This is very hurtful." Zhongli Jiju snorted lightly, "You don't need to be on guard. It's useless to be on guard. I really want to poison you, and you can't prevent it at all. I have learned a secret technique that can poison you there. If you poke me in." After saying this, Zhongli Jiju stopped, coughed slightly, and looked a little weird. Su Buling glanced at it and his eyes fell on Zhongli Jiju's tense lower body curve. "Where does this there refer to?" Zhongli Jiju saw a bit of teasing and disbelief in Su Buling's eyes, and frowned. "You are a grown man, don't you think about it? I didn't want to guard against you the night before yesterday. I would have died if you didn't let you kiss me." Su Buling laughed twice and said, "Miss Jiju is my doctor, she shouldn't watch me die, right? If you dare to move your hands or feet again, do you think I will watch you die? I guess not." Zhongli Jiju wanted to say, "Try it," but she immediately realized that if she dared to say that, Su Buling would definitely try it on the spot, so she changed her words. "It's good that you know that I treat you as a friend, so don't go too far." Seeing that she was not fooled, Su Buling did not continue to make jokes, got on his horse, and rushed to Huangkou town with Zhongli Jiju. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 503. Huangkou Town, Yuela Inn. Ning Yuhi opened the window of the wing and looked out at the street. In addition to the vendors and footmen, there were also some swordsmen in Tang family robes, scanning the street corners for the wanderers coming and going from north to south. Afraid of being noticed by the Tang family's eyeliners, Ning Yuhi just glanced at it, closed the window, and paced back and forth in the room, looking worried. Su Buling has been away for 3 days. The bloody battle in Shentang Valley has already spread here. Most news in the world likes to exaggerate. What? The heroic hero went to the meeting alone, first killed 48 swordsmen, and then fought 2 unknown dragons. The dragon pool is shattered, the gun is broken, the sword is broken, the knife is broken, and the blood dyes the Yangtze River red. Wait, according to Mr. Storyteller, Shentang Valley seems to have collapsed. Although Ning Yuhi knew that these were exaggerated, storytellers were also particular about exaggerating. Adjectives such as mountains and rivers change color, and the sound shakes the 9 continents would definitely not be used on the miscellaneous fish in the rivers and lakes. If it can be said that blood flows into rivers, then it must be true. Bleeding. Since it can be said to be so exaggerated, the bloody battle scene at that time must have been quite big. Su Buling had not been back for so long, so he was naturally a little worried. Moreover, after Su Buletinling left, some news came out from the Tang family. Several Tang family disciples who were walking around Yuyang County died unexpectedly. The techniques were clean and neat, and it was obviously the work of an expert. The Tang family must also know that Zulu is coming. In the past few days, the clan has stepped up vigilance and sent disciples out to search in various places. It seems that they want to take a preemptive strike. Judging from the current situation, Zulu is also testing the depth of the Tang family. As for when the bloody battle will occur, Ningyu he is not sure, but he expects it to be soon. With the Tang family's spies outside, Ningyu he didn't dare to go out and reveal his whereabouts. He could only sit in the house and wait for Su Buling to come back. Zhu Manzi leaned back on the chairboard, holding the latest edition of Jianghu's Strange Stories in his hand and flipping through it. He saw Ningyu he walking around for a long time, and softly advised. Sister Daning, Mr. Su is very powerful. Nothing will happen to him. He will probably be back soon. Ningyu he sighed quietly, glanced out the window again, then sat down next to Manjier, picked up the teacup and took a sip, a little absent-mindedly. Although Zhu Manzi looked naive, his mind was very active. Seeing that Ningyu he seemed to have something on his mind, he put down his book and got closer. Sister Daning, Mr. Su went to see Dazhong. He hasn't come back for so long. Are you worried that Dazhong abducted Mr. Su to be his apprentice? These words touched Ningyu he's heart. She looked around and saw that Nightingale was not in the room, then she frowned and said. That woman Zhongli Jiju is so arrogant. This time Linger is kind enough to help her, she will definitely get an advantage and behave like a good girl. I don't know what method she will use to seduce Linger to become her apprentice. Zhu Manzi held his face in his hands and said with a smile, Don't worry, Daning, Mr. Su is a decent man and will not be fooled easily. Besides, Dazhong looks like a foxy girl and has no other advantages. Mr. Su has never been follow the honey trap. Ningyu he blinked, glanced at Zhu Manzi, and said softly, Linger really likes beautiful girls. Maybe she was deceived by Ye Juniang. Isn't this good? If Dezhong uses a beauty trap, it must be to make him look younger. Sister Daning is Mr. Su's master. She is a generation younger than you. She will definitely not dare to be presumptuous in front of you in the future. No. Ningyu he frowned and said resolutely, How can that crazy woman be worthy of your child? Even when she was young, she was promoted as a wet nurse. If your child dares to touch her, don't even think about it in the future, don't even think about calling me master. Zhu Manzi knew that the two people had deep conflicts and that persuasion was useless, so he could only sigh softly. After sitting in the room for a long time, Ningyu he opened the window and took a look several times. It was not until it got late that two horses appeared outside the inn. Perhaps because they were aware of the Tang family's spying, Su Buring and Zhongli Jiju both put on bamboo hats and raincoats, and their attire was not much different from ordinary Jianghu people. Needless to say, Ningyu he knew Su Buring's body in detail. He recognized Su Buring at a glance, and his eyes showed a bit of joy. But when he saw Zhongli Jiju, the follower next to him, his expression became slightly condensed again, and he felt unhappy. Master Su is back. After Zhu Manzi found out, he quickly ran out of the room and went downstairs to greet him. Ningyu he hesitated for a moment. Although he was worried about Su Buling's physical condition, he didn't want to see Zhongli Jiju's annoying person, and he was also afraid of exposing his flaws in front of Zhongli Jiju, so he didn't get up and sat quietly in the room. Wait. After a while, a familiar voice came from the corridor. Mr. Su, are you okay? I heard you were injured. It's okay. It's just a minor injury, but it's almost healed. Dazhong, why are you so careless? You are so old, and you still need Mr. Su to rescue you when you are away from home. You don't know how anxious Mr. Su was when he heard the news that you were being remembered. Like this, the steamed stuffed buns ran away before I even finished them, and I couldn't hold them back. Yeah, it seems you still have some conscience, thank you. Haha, it should be. As the trivial chatter reached my ears, I could clearly hear that Xiao Manzi was saying nice things to Su Buletinling and win Zhongli Jiju's favor. Ning Yuhi's hand on his leg tightened slightly, and he wanted to get up to stop Manzi and push Zhongli Jiju aside. But after hesitating, there was no excuse, and it would make Su Buletinling unhappy. After thinking about it, he decided to forget it and sit in the room and continue listening. Where did he go? Why didn't you see her come out? Ning is not feeling well and is resting. Hearing this, Ning Yuhi felt warm in his heart. Just as he was about to praise Xiao Manzi for being able to speak, Su Buling's voice came over. Really? I'm going to take a look. Manzi, you accompany Jeju to change and have something to eat? Okay, let's go, Dazhong, and give me some more of your hair washing liquid. Nightingale wants it and has been nagging about it for several days. Tap tap tap. Footsteps walked towards the room. Ning Yuhi's expression changed slightly, and he quickly raised his hand to straighten the snow-white dress on his body, tangled his hair, and then assumed a sitting posture, serious in speech, neither cold nor hot. Squeak. The door opened and Su Buling walked into the wing. He took off his raincoat and hung it on the wall. He turned his head and saw that Ning Yuhi didn't react at all. The smile on his face froze slightly and he said softly. Road. Master. Ning Yuhi closed his eyes and concentrated, pretending to wake up after meditating, picked up the teacup, and glanced at Su Buling. Why did it take you so long to come back? Did something happen on the way? With a smile on his face, Su Buling walked slowly to Ning Yuhi, put his hands under Ning Yuhi's arms, raised his hands and lifted Ning Yuhi up, then held him in his arms, turned around and sat down on the chair. He sat with Ning Yuhi on his lap. This set of movements was so smooth that he had practiced it on the baby countless times. Ning Yuhi was holding the teacup before he could react. He was sitting in Su Buling's arms without spilling the tea in his hand, which showed how smooth the movements were. Your Majesty, you. Master Ning Yuhi couldn't stand it any longer. He put down the teacup and pressed Su Buling's shoulder to get up. Su Buletinling naturally gasped with a hiss expression, looking like he was in terrible pain. It hurts, it hurts. Ning Yuhi was startled, and immediately did not dare to move. She sat on Su Buling's lap with her plump waist and hips, her mutton-fat jade-like cheeks showing a bit of nervousness, and she glanced up and down. Where are you injured? Is it serious? Su Buletinling looked like I can do it and nodded gently, it's okay, just rest for a few days. Ning Yuhi no longer wanted to be shy and struggled. He raised his hand to untie Su Buling's robe and pulled his shoulders down, revealing several bandages wrapped around his body. How could it be like this? That harmful guy came here for nothing. It's really. Seeing that Su Buletinling, who was both a husband and a disciple, was seriously injured, Ning Yuhi was naturally heartbroken and didn't know what to do. Just as she was about to untie the bandage and take a look at the situation, she realized that Su Buling's hand had also opened her belt and lifted up her skirt. Your Majesty. Ning Yuhi was anxious and shy. She looked back and saw that the door was locked. She held Su Buling's hand and frowned. Don't bother yourself, just take good care of your injuries, let go of being a teacher. Su Buling was amused by the statement that it was not just a rejection but also a hookup. He hugged her tightly and looked a little stronger. Master, if you don't hurry up now and sleep with Manzi at night, I will have to take risks again. This threat was very effective. Ning Yuhi almost died of embarrassment last time. He would rather go to the wilderness and cause chaos in front of Manzi. But she hesitated for a moment. Kinkan's eyes showed a little bit of embarrassment. Ling it's not that I don't promise you, I'm really inconvenient because I'm having my period. Su Buletin Ling's expression froze slightly. He was so aroused by Zhongli Jiju that he was greedy all the way. Why is he so unlucky? Ning Yu he bit his lower lip and sighed faintly. Really, it's not that I don't want to have sex with you, God is not kind to me. It would be great if you came back early for a day. Who asked you and Ye Juniang to stay outside like this? Long. Seeing Ning Yuhi's cowardly and jealous look, Su Buling felt itchy in his heart. After thinking about it for a while, he leaned into her ear and whispered a few words. Ning Yuhi was secretly glad to have escaped. When he heard the words in his ears, he was confused for a moment, his eyes changed slightly, and he shook his head like a rattle. How about that, what are you thinking about? Su Buling stood up with Ning Yuhi in his arms and walked towards the back of the room with a friendly smile. It's okay anyway, just learn slowly. Ning Yuhi's wrist was hung on Su Buling's neck, and her warm and moist cheeks showed a bit of anxiety and nervousness. She shook her head and said, Ling don't do these things, I won't agree. If you don't agree, you'll have to find a way on your own. I won't leave anyway. Oh, what can I do? It's okay, I'm your teacher. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 504. Big Zhone, why are you alone? Why didn't little Zhone come? Chu Chu took the boat with Madame Lu and the others. They are probably going to Benzhou soon. In the room of the inn, Zhu Manzi ran downstairs to bring up food and hot water, and chatted with Zhongli Jiju warmly, but Zhongli Jiju's mind was obviously not in this room. On the way back, Zhongli Jiju had already made up her mind. Anyway, no matter what, Su Buling had taken advantage of her, and her attitude didn't seem very firm. So she would suppress Ning Yuhi first. Don't drag it out, and make it like Madame Lu, dragging the good wife into the third child. When Su Buling came back, he ran into Ning Yuhi's room and sent her and Manzi away. Naturally, she could guess what he was doing. To catch an adulterer in bed, you have to catch the weak spot to deal with a fairy sister like Ning Yuhi who doesn't care about the fireworks of the world, otherwise you will never bow down in front of her in this life. Zhongli Jiju sat in the room for a while, and when she felt that the time was about right, she took out a few small bottles of beauty products from the package, called Nightingale in, and then applied facial masks to the two little girls. Girls all love beauty, and Nightingale is the same. She has always envied Zhongli Jiju's baby-like tender skin. Without any hesitation, she lay side by side with Manzi, and was covered with seaweed mud by Zhongli Jiju. It will take about an hour to wash it off. Don't move around, otherwise it will not work. I'll go downstairs and take a walk. After Zhongli Jiju finished, he washed his hands and got up to go out. Nightingale and Manzi naturally followed the doctor's advice and lay there honestly without moving, for fear that the effect would be gone and the other party would be a little more beautiful than themselves. Zhongli Jiju went downstairs and walked out of the inn. It was already dark. Because the Tang family was watching nearby, there were not many people inside and outside the inn. She went around to the back of the inn, jumped onto the eaves lightly, and then held her breath and came to the outside of Ning Yuhi's room. Having been in contact with Su Buling for so long, Zhongli Jiju is an expert in hiding her body. She has long figured out Su Buling's warning line. She sticks to the window and does not move, listening to the voice inside. Ling goodbye. Master is good. Woo. The noise in the room came into her ears, and Zhongli Jiju's cheeks turned blood red with the naked eye. Her eyes were full of strangeness, but her breath was not the slightest wave. She continued to listen patiently. A humming sound soon came from inside, and Ning Yuhi's voice was very suppressed, and it was obvious that he was covering his mouth. When she thought of Ning Yuhi, who was usually high and mighty, and was now suffering from something unbearable under Su Buling. Zhongli Jiju's eyes showed some anger, as if saying, "Tisk, you are still a Taoist priest, and you are still a role model, keep pretending." Just listening, Zhongli Jiju also felt something was wrong, and kept thinking back to the night when he and Su Buling hid in the haystack, and felt that his breath was a little uncontrollable disorder. "Don't think about it, don't think about it, you'll be in the wrong if you're caught." Zhongli Jiju stood still, suppressing her mind and waiting quietly outside. She didn't know how long it had been. Just when she couldn't resist and was about to flee, the movement in the room finally stopped, leaving only two slightly heavy breaths and fragmented words. "Ling it's okay, you go quickly, Man Zi will come to find you later. Thank you for your hard work, master. Bah, go away, don't touch me." Dong dong dong. Footsteps sounded, the door opened and closed gently, and there was only one breathing sound in the room, and the sound of clothes being put on. Zhongli Jiju knew that the time had come, suddenly opened the window, and flipped in as light as a swallow. The panting has not stopped, and the faint fragrance is still there. In the small room, Ning Yuhi's hair was disheveled, her face was flushed, and there were a few beads of sweat on her forehead. She lay weakly on the quilt and slowly picked up the lotus belly band and white skirt on the ground with her hands. She felt dizzy, perhaps because she had no strength. She felt sleepy and moved her arms twice, then closed her eyes and leaned on the pillow to take a nap, wanting to take a while to tidy up. But before she could take a long time with her eyes closed, there was a slight creaking sound in the room, and some cold air was poured in. Someone entered the room. Ning Yuhi thought Su Buling had come back and was going to score twice again, and she felt a little ashamed and angry. She closed her eyes and raised her hand weakly. "Ling be obedient, I promised you once." Tap tap. Zhongli Jiju's eyes were full of shock and embarrassment. She walked up to him calmly, thought for a moment, and said softly, "He, are you comfortable?" Ning Yuhi, who was lying lazily, froze and almost screamed, but she held it back. Her face turned pale and she raised her hand to take out her sword, wanting to kill and silence her. Unfortunately, Zhongli Jiju was not a fool. She snatched the sword and put it behind her back. "You are not wearing any clothes. If you mess around now and Man Zi runs in, it will be fine. But if you bring in the shop assistants, it will be Su Buling who will suffer." Ning Yuhi was obviously frightened. He was at a loss and felt ashamed. He hugged the quilt tightly and shrank back in the corner. His face turned red and white, and he stammered. He wanted to explain but didn't know how to start. He wanted to scold him harshly, but he couldn't be tough at this time. You get out." He. Zhongli Jiju smiled charmingly, sat down next to him, and glanced up and down. "Don't be so excited. I'm not here to ruin your reputation. You have done it, so you dare not take responsibility for it." Ning Yuhi covered herself tightly with the quilt, breathing rapidly, but did not dare to look into Zhongli Jiju's eyes. Messing with her apprentice was a serious matter that was immoral. She was already in the wrong, and she couldn't be righteous at all when she was caught. Talk to Zhongli Jiju. At the moment I can only grit my teeth and say, if you dare to speak up, your child will not let you go." Zhongli Jiju crossed her legs and nodded with a smile. We have been friends for so many years, and it is not easy to find someone you love. As a sister, I will definitely not harm your good deeds. But you also know that I am a very honest person. If someone helps me, I will pay it back. If I help you keep the secret, you have to express your gratitude, right?" Hearing Ning Qingyi's name, Ning Yuhi's face became a little weaker. He wished he could find a hole in the ground and crawl into it. He lowered his head and whispered, You want Ba Kuei, I'll just give it to you. I'll go to Jianghu and put a message out there tomorrow. What do I want Ba Kuei to do?" He's already in his 20s. Zhongli Jiju looked at Ning Yuhi's face carefully and said with a smile, he, as the saying goes, grudges disappear with a smile. Otherwise, we can wipe out all the grudges in the past. From now on, we will be sworn brothers, Jinlan, and you will recognize me as your eldest sister. This matter is over, I promise not to spread it to outsiders' ears. Ning Yuhi was a little confused, but she was caught naked by this unruly bitch. Even if she was dissatisfied and unwilling, what could she do? She gritted her teeth and said, "Okay, as long as you forget about today, I will call you sister." Zhongli Jiju nodded with a smile, "Okay, but you will definitely complain to Su Buling later, and maybe you will blow the pillow wind and ask him to clean up and give me a warning. So I don't believe what you say, you have to write it down in black and white, draw another bet. Don't push yourself too far." Ning Yuhi originally planned to find his apprentice to take the decision and punish this unruly bitch. How could he really recognize Sister Zhongli Jiju? Seeing Zhongli Jiju being aggressive, Ning Yuhi also got angry. Anyway, Ling Er was protecting her, so there was nothing to be afraid of. Now he relaxed a little and raised his head. "Believe it or not, I will tell Ling Er later that you bullied me. See if he will deal with you." Zhongli Jiju nodded with a smile, turned around and wanted to call Man Zi over. Ning Yuhi was immediately frightened when he saw this, and quickly raised his hand, "Wait, don't go too far, I'll tell Ling Er and let him become your disciple." Zhongli Jiju shook his head quickly, "I am not his master. Do you think I am as unruly as you? Well, anyway, if you want to call me sister, without establishing a written record, I will call Man Zi in and see how her sister Daning seduces her man under her quilt." After Ning Yuhi's initial panic, his thoughts recovered a little and he realized that Zhongli Jiju was also a little weird. After hesitating for a moment, he said coldly, "Then go ahead and tell me. If you dare to speak out, I will commit suicide. See if Su Buling will kill you." "Oh!" Zhongli Jiju turned his head and tried to shout. Ning Yuhi's heart tightened, but he gritted his teeth and said nothing, just staring at Zhongli Jiju. Zhongli Jiju opened her mouth, but she really didn't dare to shout. Otherwise, if Su Buling came in, he would definitely be protecting Ning Yuhi, and he might not know what to do with her. Seeing that Ning Yuhi would rather be discovered by Man Zi than call her sister, Zhongli Jiju sighed. "That's all, I'm not a bully, please think about it again." Ning Yuhi saw Zhongli Jiju's hesitation. Since she didn't dare to expose this matter, what else was she afraid of? He straightened up immediately and said coldly, "You damn bitch, get out of here. You know the relationship between your child and me. If you dare to say a word nonsense, you will bear the consequences." Hey dash. What does it mean to be irrational and strong? When she was wronged in the past, Ning Yuhi scolded her. Why is it that now that Ning Yu is right and wrong, Ning Yuhi still scolds her? Zhongli Jiju was stunned for a moment, and was a little annoyed when he saw that Ning Yuhi, who had always been like a little sheep, not only was not embarrassed, but also threatened her. "Do you really think I don't dare to call someone over?" Ning Yuhi was also willing to risk his life, and would rather die than bow down. "If you have the ability, go and call me. Anyway, I have done everything, so what are you afraid of? See if Ling Er will deal with you." Zhongli Jiju's eyes darkened, "I really screamed." Ning Yuhi turned around and shouted to the door, "Man Zi." The sound was very loud, and Su Buling could clearly hear it over there. Zhongli Jiju was startled. She didn't dare to let Su Buling know about this. She quickly ran out of the window and said angrily, "Are you crazy?" As soon as the window was closed, there were footsteps outside the door. Then the door opened, and a well-dressed Su Buling walked in. Man Zi also poked his head in through the door and took a few curious glances. "Sister Daning, why did you go to bed so early? What's wrong?" Ning Yuhi had already huddled in the quilt, slowed down his tone and said softly. I feel a little uncomfortable. Please give me a glass of water. Thanks. Oh. Zhu Manzi nodded, turned around and ran out to pour water. Su Buling glanced at it twice. Master, are you feeling uncomfortable? Do you want Juju to come over and take a look? Ningyu he turned over and turned his back to Su Buling, not wanting to pay attention. Su Buling thought that the master was still having a tantrum about what had happened just now, so he didn't feel like saying anything at the moment. After comforting him, he turned around and left the room. Thank you to Mr. Unlucky Dad for the 55,000 reward. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 505. During the Suan He period, Zujia Jianmen in Yuzhu. At that time, the sword master wished Zhou Shan his 50th birthday, and people from all walks of life gathered in Shanggu County. The knights who were waiting beside the official road were crowded together, watching a knight with a prominent reputation in the world riding his horse and whipping past, their eyes full of longing and yearning. The Zhu family in Yuzhu is as rich and famous as the Lu family in Qingzhou. They face each other from the north to the south. They are the two most prominent Jianghu families in the area. In order to celebrate Chaoshan's birthday, the heads of the Tang family and Yankai Villa personally came to visit. The Cao family of Junshan and the Lu family of Donghai also sent their nephews. The scale of the celebration was no less than that of a prince. Outside the sword gate, the eldest son Zhu politely welcomed many distinguished guests. The sword master Zhu Zhoushan was in the village, chatting with old friends in the world. On the hillside on the side of Zhuangzi, there is an old Osmanthus tree. Under the tree, you can have a bird's eye view of the entire Jianmen. Zulu, who was still young, stood side by side with his wife Guo Shanrong under the big Osmanthus tree, looking at the jagged buildings below. The Zhu family is a family of swordsmen. In the past, they had a three-legged relationship with the Cao and Lu families. Now, with the sword master Zhu Kishan, they have dominated the world for a generation, and only a handful of people can compete with them. As the saying goes, a tiger father has no dog sons. Among Zhu Kishan's sons, the eldest son is stable and the second son is diligent. But these qualities are easy to have a place in the world, but they are far from enough to make further progress. If you want to ride on top of the world and have a bird's eye view of all living beings, to put it bluntly, you only have to pay attention to God will reward you with food. Only geniuses favored by heaven can reach heights in martial arts that ordinary people cannot reach. It is difficult to rely solely on diligence and perseverance. Make up for the inherent innate gap. Zhu Kishan has reached the top of martial arts, and he understands this truth that may make ordinary warriors despair, so he has high hopes for Zhu Liaolang. When he was 3 years old, he made up his mind to prepare the family inheritance. The sword was handed into Rokuro's hands. Maybe it's because those who are favored are always confident. People with extraordinary talents often have more out-of-the-box ideas. It's just like Su Buling obviously has a lot of talent, but all he thinks about is a girl. Zhu Liaolang has hardly ever taken the right path as long as he can remember. He learned a set of Zujia swordsmanship and was still messing up at the age of 12. Instead, he followed the knights in the world and learned a lot of marksmanship and swordsmanship, and he even boasted about it. Said, "Swords are for women, men should use swords and guns." As a contemporary sword master, it goes without saying how Zhu Kishan reacted when he heard these words. He was reluctant to fight, and being reasonable was not the style of a sword master. In the end, he could only drive this unfilial son out of the house. When did he figure it out? When will you come back? Zhu Liaolang might have been spoiled, and he had a bad temper at that time. He even contradicted the sword master's father. You are getting old, and you have lost your ability to learn swordsmanship and magic. I will not be able to learn any good skills from you. When I become famous, you will have to beg me to come back. Then he was beaten out. From then on, Zhu Liaolang never returned to the Zhu family. He kept his name anonymously and wandered around like an ordinary wanderer. Then, like most of the wanderers, he met a pleasant person somewhere in a certain year. Girl. The two people were in love with each other, committed to each other for life, and found a place with the most beautiful scenery to settle down. As for the heroic words when going out, I have long forgotten them. Today I wish Kishan a 50th birthday and wish Liaolang back, just because my wife is pregnant and I feel that I have to tell my parents about such a big thing. But today there are many guests in Zhuangzi, including many familiar disciples of the same generation. Zhu Liaolang stood under the osmanthus tree and hesitated. He didn't know whether he should go back to tell his father the good news at this time. He was a little worried that his hot-tempered father would kick him and his sweetheart out in public, which would probably lead to another quarrel. Under the sweet-scented osmanthus tree, the round and plump Guo Shanrong looked at the endless building complex with her hands on her hips and said with a smile, "Rokuro, our baby will definitely like this place when he grows up. Is that old man with the white beard my father-in-law, the great swordsman?" Guo Shanrong is a little chivalrous girl in the world, who also uses a sword. She obviously admires her father-in-law very much. She chatters, but her eyes are very reserved, and she is a little afraid to go down. Zhuangzi was full of guests, and Zhu Kishan and the guests were enjoying themselves, as if nothing was missing because of the loss of a son. Zhu Liaolang stood under the osmanthus tree. After struggling for a long time, he still walked down the hillside without moving, shaking his head and saying, "Shanrong, when I ran away from home, I said I would come back after becoming famous, but I ended up being too busy traveling around the mountains and rivers with you and forgetting to practice martial arts. If I go back now, I will definitely be looked down upon. Otherwise, in a few years, we will be a family of 3 come back together, Dad might be happier." Guo Shanrong came from a poor family, and he was too embarrassed to worship the contemporary sword master. Especially now that there were so many famous heroes in Zhuangzi, he had already become frightened. Hearing this, he nodded quickly. "Okay, let's come back in a few years, but we agreed to let the sword master pick the baby's name. We can't wait until the baby is older. What should we do?" Zhu Liaolang looked back at Zhuangzi, who was brightly lit like daylight, with lanterns and colorful decorations, and was very happy. He thought for a moment and said softly, "Let me choose a name. It's called Zhu Das Hu. It can be regarded as a name at home. Wish you a happy birthday, it's so unpleasant to hear. What if it's a girl?" Guo Shanrong shook his head quickly, touched his slightly bulging belly, looked at the century-old osmanthus tree behind him, and smiled. "Call it Zhu Manzi. It's suitable for both men and women. Let's come back when the sweet-scented osmanthus blooms on the branches. We can also tell the baby about the origin of the name." "Yeah, that's okay." Zhu Liaolang nodded, thought for a moment, and in order to leave a proof, he drew his sword and carved a line of small characters under the big osmanthus tree. Zhu Manzi, the 18th generation grandson of the Zhu family in Yuzhou, got his name from this tree Zhu Liuliu. 5 years later, the manor, which was once full of distinguished guests, was now filled with smoke and desolate. Under Jianmen, there were mountains of corpses and seas of blood. The officers and soldiers drew their swords and drew their crossbows, surrounding the huge Zhu family manor, staring at it covetously. Nearly 100 members of the Zhu family and apprentices armed with weapons set up simple bunkers in the courtyard to defend it. On the hillside, the old osmanthus tree has grown a little bigger, and the small characters on it have also become bigger. After 3 days of bloody battles, he killed more than 700 enemies, but Zhu Zhoushan, who was still not stained with blood, held his ancestral sword Tai and stood under the dense osmanthus tree, looking a little absent-minded. At the bottom of the hill, Zhang Xiang, the chief officer of the detective department, Lao Yi, and 300 wolf guards were 100 steps away. Tang Jiao of the Tang family, Yin Tong, a retainer of the Kui family, and others were holding weapons as if they were facing a great enemy. Zhu Zhoushan, you are already at the end of your strength. If you surrender, the emperor will still show mercy. If you disobey again, you can run, but the whole family of your Zhu family can't run away. Zhang Xiang's scolding with a bit of fear came from the bottom of the hill, and was blown away by the gentle mountain breeze. Zhu Chaoshan's long white hair moved with the wind, and the sword in his hand was as steady as a mountain. He seemed to be oblivious to the noise of a group of ants. Unfortunately, the world is too big, and the rivers and lakes are too small. One person's strength can shake the mountains and the mountains, but it is difficult to shake the world. Under the imperial power, everyone is an ant. Even Zhu Zhoushan, who suppressed the entire generation of the rivers and lakes, knew that the land under his feet had come to an end. Whether he surrendered or not, the Zhu family would be removed from the world from now on. Looking at the line of small words on the tree trunk, Zhu Chaoshan's eyes became clearer. At this moment, he suddenly felt a little fortunate that he had driven his most beloved son out of the house. Otherwise, the Zhu family would have no descendants from today. Manzi, a good name. Standing in front of the handwriting left by Lu Lang at some unknown time, Zhu Zhoushan thought for a moment, raised the sword to erase the line of words, and then carved it again. 3,000 miles across, the sword shocked millions of people. Today it is dead here, the grass is broken and still has roots, it is a blessing. Don't worry about this vengeance, human power is limited, and God's will is like this, it cannot be avoided. After writing, Zhu Zhoushan shook the sword lightly, and once again killed the sea of soldiers under the hillside. 10 years later, it was still under the old Osmanthus tree. Zulu, who had regained the title of Sword Saint, was alone, like Zhu Zhoushan, holding a long sword, his hair moving in the wind, staring at the line of words that had grown a little bit longer. The Zhu family manor at the foot of the hill had long since turned into a ruin. The seals affixed by the government were tattered, most of the houses had collapsed, and a few ragged beggars gathered there. The entire Zhu family only had a Jianmen gate that had stood for hundreds of years, standing alone in the wind and snow. Occasionally, there would be wandering knights who came here to admire its reputation, and then left in disappointment. It is God's will, and it cannot be avoided. Zulu knew that this sentence was left for him, asking him not to seek revenge, to live well with his wife and children, and to leave a legacy for the Zhu family. In this regard, Zhu Liru did not listen to his father's words as he did when he was driven out of the house in the past. His eyes were as sharp as a sword and he shook his head gently. The hatred of killing my father is irreconcilable. If the blood debt is not repaid with blood, how can I live in this world with dignity? What if you are the emperor? Even if I, Zulu, overturn the sky, I will let you rest in peace in the underworld. After saying this, Zulu turned his head to look at the people in the Eagle building below the hillside and raised his hand. Let's go. Yes. The more than 10 masters of the Ying building immediately turned their horses and galloped towards the Tang family in Yuzhou. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 506. It's quiet at night. Su Buring lay on the pillow, thinking about the details of the close-to-hand fight with Dabai, and felt no sleepiness. The inn's lantern swayed outside the window, its shadow reflected on the ceiling. Nightingale was not asleep either, with a mask on her face and her big eyes staring at the shadow on the ceiling, motionless. The facial mask prepared by Zhongli Jiju should be seaweed mud mixed with various herbs. The effect is really good, but the appearance is far inferior to modern facial masks. It is dark and green, and it looks a bit seeping at night. The two of them were lying side by side. Su Buling glanced sideways and wanted to chat a few words about home affairs to pass the time, but Nightingale said dully. Sister Zhongli said you can't move or speak. Can't move. Su Buling turned sideways and took a look at the motionless little Nightingale. Maybe he was bored and had some bad taste, so he reached out and scratched the Nightingale's waist. It's a pity that Nightingale's concentration is not that good. She lay on the bed like a salted fish, without even frowning. She slightly squinted her eyes, showing a bit of young master, you are so childish expression. Su Buling touched her delicate waist and felt that the little maid was paying less and less attention to him as a young master. After thinking for a moment, she slid down and squeezed the edge of her underwear with her hands. It felt cold to the touch. Smooth and delicate. Ha, it's almost the same as master. Nightingale's eyes changed slightly, her eyes slanted to the other side, and she said in a low voice. I'm still young, different from Sister Daning. Su Buling was a little amused. Just as he was about to tease little Nightingale, footsteps suddenly sounded in the corridor, and then the door was pushed open. Su Buling hurriedly withdrew his hand and looked up, only to see Zhu Manzi in a small skirt walking in with a pillow in his arms and said with a smile. Mr. Su, tell me about the bloody battle with the 48 swordsmen in Longtan. Sister Daning was asleep, and I ran here secretly. Zhu Manzi was talking when he looked up and saw Nightingale lying on the pillow with a facial mask on her face. She wrinkled her eyebrows and trotted up to him and said dissatisfiedly. Little girl, why are you so unethical? As we agreed, you actually started the small stove by yourself. I got the things from the big clock. Nightingale was caught eating alone. She looked a little embarrassed and secretly glanced at her young master. Su Buling shook his head and chuckled, moved a little further in, and made room. Okay, I'll just ask Miss Jeju to prepare more medicine tomorrow. Come and lie down. Zhu Manzi's little face was full of seriousness. Mr. Su, this is not a problem with the medicine. She is 1 year younger than me and more tender than me. As we agreed, if she still secretly turns on the stove, she will get sick over time. While talking, Zhu Manzi crawled over Nightingale, lay down between the two people, and squeezed out. You're unfaithful, sleep outside. Nightingale felt a little unreasonable, so she couldn't say anything, so she lay down obediently and pretended to be dead with her eyes closed. Su Buling had small cotton padded jackets on his hands and backs, so he couldn't show favoritism to anyone. He shook his head and smiled, and pulled the quilt tighter. Stop arguing and tell a story. Zhu Manzi was lying comfortably in Nightingale's warm quilt. He didn't dare to press against Su Buling. He just lay on his side with his hands under his face. He looked at Su Buling's side face and said with a smile. I heard from Dazhong that you met Wudane killer Chandayazai in Longtan. I heard many storytellers say that Chandayazai has profound Taoism and can summon wind and rain. Is that true? Almost. Su Buling nodded slightly with a stern face, but the hand under the quilt was not very honest and moved to Xiao Manzi's skirt. Zhu Manzi was rubbed a few times. Although she was still a little squirmy, she didn't resist much anymore. She glanced behind her with a red face and continued to ask. I heard from Dazhong that when Mr. Su was beaten so hard that he was running away, it was she who used Miao border secrets to break Chandayazai's Taoist Bagua formation, allowing Mr. Su to escape. Bah! Su Buling thought of Zhongli Jeju whining and then throwing away a few bottles of itchy powder, and he wanted to laugh a little. However, Su Buling hesitated for a moment, but still did not destroy the impression of Miss Jeju in Manzi's heart, and nodded gently. It's not that exaggerated. Miss Jeju did help a lot. Is it hot in your clothes? Why don't you take them off? I don't. Zhu Manzi quickly tightened his collar and stepped back, almost squeezing Nightingale down. He said with a red face, men and women are not allowed to be intimate. My father is also in Yuzhu. If he is watching in the dark, the young master's leg was broken. Su Buling was actually also afraid that his father-in-law, who was known as the sword master, would go crazy. He hadn't revealed that he was getting married, so he couldn't just eat up his daughter and wipe her clean. At the moment, he could only indulge in hand addiction and said with a chuckle, "I'm just afraid that you'll be bored and have no peace of mind." "I know." Zhu Manzi pressed the big hand on her lapel and whispered, "How could Mr. Su, such a decent person, think of such a thing, right, Nightingale?" Nightingale has heard and seen for a long time, and has long understood the nature of her young master, so she closed her eyes and said, "The young master likes older people and is not interested in movies about little girls." Su Buling's stern expression froze slightly, and he raised his hand and flicked Nightingale's forehead. "You're old, that's called maturity. If your sister Xiang hears this, I'll have to let you go to the kitchen to boil water in the future." "Oh." Nightingale replied weakly. When Zhu Manzi heard this, he thought carefully. He lay in the middle and thought about it for a while, then straightened his chest. "Mr. Su, I should be considered a bit mature, right?" Nightingale rubbed the forehead that had just been beaten and snorted, "You are quite mature in body, but your brain has not caught up. Hey, why are you talking? Go and go." There was a lot of noise and laughter filling the room. While he was having fun, Su Buring suddenly twitched his ears, raised his hand to make a shushing gesture, and turned his head to look at the window. Manzi stopped talking and looked slightly confused. Nightingale sat up and ran to the window wearing a belly band. She opened it a little and took a look inside. She saw a man wearing Tang family robes riding a horse on the street. He was talking to the Tang family disciples who were watching on the street. "What, his face is quite serious." The distance was relatively far, but Nightingale understood lip reading, so she looked carefully for a moment by the light of the torch, and said softly, "Sir, Zulu has shown up. The Tang family is recruiting outside help. It looks like he didn't come here alone." When Zhu Manzi heard the news about his biological father, he turned his head, ran to the window, took a look, and asked, "Where is my dad?" Nightingale shook her head. "The Tang family's informants are all over Yuyang County. They probably haven't reached the Tang family sword village yet. We won't find out until we get there." Su Buling didn't hesitate, got up and put on his clothes. "Go and talk to Jeju and Master, and go over to check the situation first." Zhu Manzi grew up outside and had no idea about the Zhu family's blood feud, but it was about his father's safety, so he looked a little nervous. He quickly ran back to the house, shook Ning Yuhi up, and then the five of them left the inn together, rushing towards the Tang family in Yuzhu in the night. "Thank you Siang Zongji for the 10,000 reward. Day and night are reversed, I can't sleep and I feel groggy and lack of energy. I need to adjust my state a little. There will be 2 updates today. The prince is very fierce." Author, Guan Guan Gongzi. Chapter 507. In the twilight, Su Buling led a few women along the official road toward Tangjiajie and swung along the Luan River. Zhongli Jeju was taking a beauty sleep, and was a little dissatisfied with being dragged up in the middle of the night. She rode a big red horse and hung at the back, ignoring neither Su Buling nor Ning Yuhi. The main reason for ignoring Ning Yuhi was that Zhongli Jeju had discovered Ning Yuhi's shameful deeds, but Ning Yuhi threatened her in return, warning her that if she dared to say anything, Su Buling would kick her out. Zhongli Jeju was really afraid that Ning Yuhi would instigate Su Buling to kick her out. Given her current relationship with Su Buling would definitely protect Ning Yuhi, so she could only swallow her anger and make other plans. Ning Yuhi rode beside Su Buling on horseback. After being discovered by Zhongli Jeju about her affairs with Su Buling, she became more open-minded, with an appearance of "I just feed my apprentice white steamed buns, what can you do to me?" As for why he didn't tell Su Buling about Zhongli Jeju's eavesdropping and thus drove Zhongli Jeju away, there are some explanations. Ning Yuhi understood something from Zhongli Jiju's insistence on being her sister. It is estimated that Zhongli Jiju, this crazy woman, changed her mind and stopped snatching apprentices and switched to snatching men. In Ning Yuhi's mind, Zhongli Jiju is completely capable of doing this, so Ning Yuhi is naturally not happy. But the love between men and women is different from becoming a disciple. Su Buling probably has other thoughts in keeping Zhongli Jiju by his side. Ning Yuhi is now Su Buling's young wife, and she really likes Su Buling. Saying bad things and driving other women out is always suspected of jealousy. After thinking again and again, Ning Yuhi still plans to find out Su Buling's words first, so as to avoid getting entangled and thinking that she is troublesome and unreasonable. Originally, these things should be discussed during the day, but after hearing that something happened to the Tang family, Ning Yuhi had no mood to think about it. He rode his horse as fast as he could to the Tang family, asking for news from the people on the road. When the 5 people were halfway there, they heard rumors that Zulu had begun to clear out spies around the Tang family, and he might soon start to wipe out the family. Ning Yuhi was anxious, fearing that Zulu would kill all the men, women, and children of the Tang family without leaving a single one behind, so he could only change to Nightingale's Mobei horse, and went ahead with Su Buling and Manzi, while Zhongli Jiju and Nightingale chased after them. The surging water rushed eastward into the sea, the mountains were covered with snow, and the shaking of torches was like a sky full of stars, scattered along the banks of the Luan River. Ah! Where? The roars and screams were heard from time to time. The Tang family members followed the sound and searched for the enemy's traces in the snowy mountains. However, after finding the place, there was only a dead body with a sword in the throat. There was not even a footprint left on the snow. It was impossible to know how many people came. The Luan River made a sharp turn on the west side of Chin County. The vast area in the middle of the bend was surrounded by water on 3 sides, presenting a situation of dragon coiling and tiger crouching. It was called Yavotan by the local people. The Yuzhu Tang family, which is now ranked as the first of the 4 major sword families and one of the 10 martial arts champions in the world, took root here, so it is also called Tangjia Sword Manor. In previous years, the martial arts world was in chaos, and it was common for various forces to fight over a disagreement. Before the Yuzhu Tang family became rich, they were only a medium-sized force. In order to prevent their enemies from directly bringing people to make a mess, they chose to settle down in such a dangerous place. At the entrance of Jianshuang, there was a high wall and arrow tower, like a castle that was as solid as a rock. However, these defensive facilities may be useful for dealing with peasant uprisings. When encountering real martial arts masters, it is just like a slightly higher wall, which can't stop anything at all. If you want to defend against martial arts masters, you have to look at the person. Tangjiazhuang is very large, and there is a small town outside the high wall. Because it is highly valued by the court, the Tang family has also won over many martial arts friends over the years. At this time, they all rushed to the town, looking like they were ready to help the Tang family. However, most of the Jianghu people who can socialize with the Tang family are not the kind of people with great righteousness. Knowing that it was the sword Saint Zulu who came to kill them, no Jianghu minions dared to run out to block the way. Most of them just pretended to be in the taverns and inns. There were even more Jianghu people who looked down on the Tang family. After hearing the news, they rushed to the outside of the Tang family's sword manor. Although they did not dare to do anything to the court and the Tang family, they could still watch the show. Such a scene of one side is in trouble, and all sides are watching is also unique in the Jianghu, which shows how bad the Tang family's reputation is in the Jianghu. Of course, the Tang family did not expect to survive this crisis by relying on Jianghu rubbish. Since they have surrendered to the court and were retaliated by Jianghu thieves, the court would lend a hand even if they did not ask for help. Otherwise, the aristocratic families who surrendered to the court were exterminated by Jianghu thieves, and the court did not care, so who would be willing to serve the court? At this time, the huge Tang family sword manor was brightly lit, and all the Tang family children, young and old, wore swords on their waists and guarded the manor. At the entrance of the sword manor, there was a small square behind the high wall. At the end of the square, a dragon-shaped wall was built, like the Cao family in Junction, and there was a martial arts stage below, which was considered a place for martial arts people to compete. However, for a wandering knight in the martial arts world, it would be a good thing to be famous if he could compete in places such as the Lu family Baiachi Cliff and the Cao family Panlong Terrace. However, if he became famous in front of the Tang family, he would definitely be scolded as a running dog of the court, so this place has never been used since it was built. Behind the square, in the Tang family's reception hall, a dinner was being set up. Maids walked through it, and there were also singing girls and dancing girls playing music, but the atmosphere in the hall was obviously not lively. Tang Xiao, the contemporary military commander, was dressed in rich clothes and a jade crown, with a sword in his hand. He sat upright on the main seat, staring at the dragon screen wall outside the gate, and his thoughts were silent in the memories of the past. Before he succeeded the family head, Tang Xiao, like Zulu and Lu Beiming, was a young hero in this world. He advocated the word xia and paid attention to family rules and traditions at all times. Like his ancestors in the past, he accumulated little by little. With prestige, all he wants is to advance to the next level in the world. But talent is determined by God, and God is not so fair and just. Tang Jiao was the most talented of his generation in the Tang family. Even in his early 20s, he had few opponents in the world. But when you reach the top of a road, the scenery you see will always make you despair. Just like the number one scholar in the imperial examination, millions of people are selected into the top 3. The higher you go, the more densely you encounter geniuses. Some people can be outstanding. After you see it, you feel that there is no difference between yourself and the monkey on the tree. The difference is so big that you can't even think about whether you are superior or inferior. Tang Jiao is like this. He has reached the top of the martial arts at a young age, but the ones competing on the same stage are the proud men of the new and old generations, Sidu Yuejin, Zhu Kexin, Chen Daizai, Lu Beiming. This name was like a mountain standing in front of him, so tall that he just glanced at it and knew that he would never be able to catch up in his footsteps or become the focus of the world's warriors like them. But as long as you live, you will always have to fight. Just as Hua Jingting, the chief steward of the Xiao family in Huainan, commented, it was difficult for Tang Jiao to become a martial arts master by practicing martial arts, but he was very talented if he joined the officialdom. Tang Jiao was extremely sensitive to the situation in the court. Before Songji ascended the throne, he guessed that the late emperor had passed the throne to Songji, who was a martial artist. He also found out that Songji did not like the Jianghu people who were chivalrous and violent. He began to move around secretly and contacted the court. As Tang Jiao expected, after Songji came to power, the first thing he did was to wipe out those who were disobedient to control. Tang Jiao took this opportunity to show his courtesy and help the court remove all local obstacles in Yuzhou, and he became the leader of the country. The Jianghu family has brought the whole family to unprecedented heights. Tang Jiao believed that he had done nothing wrong. Serving the court and suppressing the traitors was an honest matter. There was nothing wrong with it in the history books. If he was wrong, it could only be because he was born in the world. Now that he has done these things, Tang Jiao knew that one day he would come to his door sooner or later. Although everyone in Jianghu had betrayed his relatives, at least his current backer was much bigger than Jianghu. He was just a Zulu, but he would be able to do it if he came. What to do with him? The mood of other people in the hall was similar to that of Tang Xiao. They were confident and confident. The two brothers Tang Juer and Tang Sun were very familiar with each other and chatted politely with the seniors sitting here. Yin Tung, who had defeated the Zhu family together, was sitting on the right side of the banquet, alongside Song Ying. Compared with Song Ying's black sword and majestic weapon, Yin Tong looks a bit deformed. He is a dwarf with a height of only 5 feet, but he is not as immature as a child. His skin is full of wrinkles, like a horse missing all its hair. Monkey, wearing baggy clothes, looks a little showy just by looking at the appearance. However, everyone present did not show disdain for Yin Tong's ugly appearance. As the general of the Kui family in Yuzhou, Yin Tong was known for being cunning and difficult to guard against, and his skills should not be ignored. It was Yin Tong who gave the old sword master Zhuzhou Mountain the locking dragon Gu. Apart from him, no one could come out alive within 10 steps of Zhuzhou Mountain. The person who assassinated Ningyu and ruined the Tang family's plan was actually led by Yin Tong, but the Tang family didn't know about it. The Kui and Tang families now have a good relationship on the surface, and the Kui family can't shirk it, so they ask Yin Tong to come over and help support the scene. Yin Tong worked for the Kui family, one of the 5 great clans, and in his heart he looked down on a family like the Tang family. At this time, he was still a little dissatisfied and looked at Song Ying next to him. "Lord Song is already here, why did you ask me to come here? No matter how powerful Zulu is, can he still be better than you in chess?" The Junchen Cao family was no less famous than the Zhu family. Song Ying was the eldest son of the Cao family, and she followed exactly the same path as Tang Xiao. However, the Cao family retreated directly from the world, and Song Ying changed her surname, so that the Cao family would not be beaten by everyone like the Tang family. Although Song Ying was not a chivalrous gentleman, unlike Tang Xiao, he was really well versed in the officialdom and became one of Song Ji's confidants. He could mobilize the wolf guards and secret spies of the detective division, and his status was higher than that of Tang Xiao. Xiao's half-heartedness is much higher. Hearing Yin Tong's somewhat mocking words, Song Ying's expression did not change much and she said calmly, "Yin Lao is old. He may not have been out for a long time. He doesn't know how dangerous the world is now. It would be good to go out and see the world." Yin Tong chuckled softly, picked up the wine glass and drank it in one gulp, without answering any more words. After all, everyone is not a member of the Jianghu community and has to follow the official path. Killing people to vent their anger over a disagreement will not work in the court. The banquet was carried out in an orderly manner, and the lights in the town outside were brightly lit. From time to time, disciples of the Tang family would come back and report that so-and-so was killed, but the manpower and location of the other party were not traced at all. But judging from the position of the unplugged eyeliner, the distance is getting closer. Finally, in the early hours of the morning, when the children of the Tang family were all drowsy outside, the noise of the crowd suddenly sounded outside the high wall of the Tang family sword manor, and the children of the Tang family who were standing on the watchtower ran in rolling and crawling. Said anxiously, "Master, Zulu is here." Tang Jiao's face darkened slightly, he picked up the sword beside him and said coldly, "How many people came?" "One." "One." Tang Jiao was stunned, looking around at the many masters in the hall, slightly puzzled. "Is he here to die alone?" The disciple was speechless. Song Ying learned from intelligence that all the masters of the Eagle building had come out to Yuzhou, including Li Hansheng. It was impossible that only one person came. He raised his hand and said, "Master Tang, go out and take a look. There must be an ambush around. I will show up later." Tang Jiao was awarded the title of Wu Kui. He was beaten at his door. It was impossible for him to hide behind Song Ying. He didn't say much at the moment. He flicked his sleeves and strode out of the hall. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 508. A long bluestone street runs through the town to the front door of the Tang family. Many Jianghu people gathered in Gulan restaurant and tea house and inn. They were actually skeptical about whether the 6th celebration party would come to their door. After all, the news was spread before they arrived, giving the Tang family time to prepare in advance. It's inappropriate no matter how you look at it. It was already early in the morning, and it would be daylight if we waited any longer. Many people in the world were dizzy waiting, and were ready to lie down and continue waiting tomorrow. At this moment, the sudden commotion on the street attracted everyone's attention. Under the dark sky, two large lanterns were hung at the entrance of Beihang Street. The heavy snow in winter made the vision hazy, making it difficult to see what was happening in the distance. At some point, the waiter with sharp eyes spotted a dark figure appearing on the street, walking towards the Tang family, with steady steps but extremely fast speed. Quickly, he passed the street outside the window in the blink of an eye. The Jianghu people who were sitting in the restaurants and tea shops to keep warm took a quick look and saw that the visitor was wearing a grey long jog, with his hair tied up with a cloth belt, and an unsheathed iron sword hanging on his waist. He was walking on the snow-covered street. But there is no trace of stepping on the snow. Zulu was born in Yuzhou, and he was somewhat famous when he was young. He was able to come over to watch the lively crowds, and he was probably well informed and had some skills. Although nearly 20 years later, he still recognized him from the appearance that resembled the old sword master Zhu Kishan. Who is coming out? Myakuro. Coming, coming. Wish you heroes. Blessings to the sword saint. The people gathered in the small town were all agitated, but knowing Zhu Liu's purpose, no one dared to come forward to strike up a conversation. A few old people with some reputation in the Yuzhou world even tried to persuade him. Lu Lang, why are you here alone? This matter should be considered in the long run. You are the only spark in the Zhu family. You must not act impulsively. When the Zhu family was in trouble, not everyone looked on indifferently. Many people from the Jianghu community who had been cared for by the Zhu family in Yuzhou spontaneously ran to lend a helping hand. Among those who rushed over, there were many apprentices who studied under the Zhu family. This incident they all looked ashamed and did not dare to raise their heads. Zulu stood upright and said nothing as he walked down Beihang Long Street and went straight to the gate of the Tang family with swords drawn and crossbows drawn. He faced hundreds of Tang family children and cowardly Yamen policemen who did not dare to step forward. Simply spit out two words. Open the door. The person guarding the door outside was Tang Zun, the second master of the Tang family. Seeing Zulu coming alone in front of a large crowd, his face turned slightly gloomy. But in the final analysis, the Tang family is still a martial arts family, and they also call themselves a swordsmanship family. No matter how bad their reputation is, they cannot abandon themselves and lose face. If Zulu and his men sneaked into the Tang family, the worst possible outcome would be to swarm them and destroy them. Nowadays, when people come to the door in an upright manner, you can't just chop them off with a knife in a hurry. Tang Zun stood with his hands behind his back and said in a cold voice, Zulu, I think it's not easy for you to work hard to gain a reputation. Go back today and I, the Tang family, will let bygones be bygones. Essay. Before he finished speaking, there was a flash of sword light in front of the Tang family's door. Before the many people who came to watch could see what was going on, the bolt of the Tang family's red door had been broken and slowly opened, revealing the dragon screen wall behind it. Tang Zun put his right hand on the hilt of the sword, and the sword was half an inch out of the sheath. His left hand was covering his throat. Blood seeped out between his fingers. His eyes were about to burst. He stared at the empty street in front of him, and he fell down after a long while. Plop. You. Second master. The face of the Tang family disciple holding the sword suddenly changed, but facing the contemporary sword master, how could he dare to take even half a step forward, hold the sword and retreat to the high wall, as if facing a formidable enemy? Zhu Liu's iron sword was still hanging on his waist, as if it had never been taken off. He turned his head and glanced at Tang Zun, who was still breathing, and said in a cold voice, Let's forget the past. Are you worthy of it? Tang Xun was obviously unworthy, so he had no chance to answer. The red lacquer door opened, and the Tang family disciples behind them retreated to both sides of the road with swords in their hands, their eyes horrified, and they were in a dilemma. Behind the dragon screen wall, Tang Xiao, dressed in rich clothes, walked out from the side. He looked up and saw the body of his second uncle lying on the street. His eyes turned blood red for a moment. He paused for a moment, but he recovered after a moment and held his sword. Handel walked to the martial arts stage and said coldly, "Zulu, you are so brave." Zulu walked slowly through the windy and snowy small square and stared at Tang Jiao coldly. "Give you a chance, challenge me to a duel, and only kill all the men in your family. If not, all the men in your family will die." Tang Jiao glared angrily, "Just you? Just me?" Zulu kept walking, slowly took off the iron sword from his waist, pointed it diagonally at the ground, and walked towards Tang Jiao. Tang Jiao clenched the sword inlaid with pearls in his left hand. At first, he remained motionless and looked at each other calmly. However, Zulu quickly reached 30 steps away, without any intention of stopping, and kept walking forward. Nearly 100 Tang family disciples gathered in the square, but at this time they all seemed to have turned into pieces of wood, standing there blankly. No one even spoke to stop them. Tang Juer and Tang Sun were usually arrogant and domineering, but at this moment they seemed to have become modest gentlemen. They stood behind their father, looking at the toes of Zulu's shoes, not daring to move their eyes even half an inch upward. "Zulu, if you think that I, the Tang family, are made of clay." Tang Jiaoqiang held up his momentum and shouted angrily, but after saying this, Zulu was already 20 steps away. For a master-level master, 10 steps to kill is the basic skill, and 20 steps is basically equivalent to walking to the face. Tang Juer gritted his teeth and quietly moved back. Tang Xian glanced at his younger brother and moved back silently. No matter how powerful Tang Jiao was, he was still not strong enough to arm wrestle with the contemporary sword master. Seeing Zulu cross the distance of 20 steps, he stepped back without any hesitation and said loudly, "Close the door." The children of the Tang family under the high wall heard the sound and ignored the cynicism of the Jianghu people outside. They hurriedly closed the door and blocked it with their long swords to prevent the Jianghu people from rushing in with their swords drawn to help. In the huge square, apart from the disciples of the Tang family, only the sword master Zulu was left. After closing the door, Tang Jiao apparently put his face aside and quickly stepped back, saying loudly, "Master Song! Master Song!" It was only then that Zulu stopped, holding the unsheathed iron sword in his hand, and said coldly, "Tang Jiao, do you think you can escape disaster by calling Song Ying?" Beads of sweat rolled down Tang Jiao's forehead. He almost leaned under the martial arts stage, gritted his teeth and said, "I, the Tang family, have served the country with a clear conscience for what I have done. If you have the ability to destroy the entire Tang family today, just do it." Zulu stood in the wind and snow, but his eyes were condescending. "Tang Jiao, don't you think you are living like a dog? You don't even dare to draw your sword against me." Tang Jiao swallowed, gritted his teeth and said, "What age are you still talking about these rules of the world? Since you came here today, there is no way you can get out alive." Zulu's eyes were dull. "Now that I'm here, I don't want to get out alive, but you and your sons will definitely die here today." Behind the panlong screen wall, Song Ying and Yintung couldn't wait any longer when they saw Tang Jiao being forced into the state. Song Ying jumped up onto the panlong shadow wall with her Yanling saber in hand, and hunted in the wind dressed in black wolf guard clothes. "Zulu, you can't destroy the Tang family today, and you can't kill Tang Jiao either. I would like to advise you. Show as many people as you have brought. If you can't beat them, I'll just leave. If you can, I'll give you a chance to escape." When Tang Jiao heard this, he was stunned for a moment and raised his head. Master Song, you. Song Ying's eyes were cold. Why, do you still expect me to risk my life for the Tang family? Tang Jiao opened his mouth, but had nothing to say. Zulu stood in front of the martial arts stage and glanced at Yin Tong, who was standing behind the crowd. The enemies were basically here, so he raised his hand without saying any more nonsense. In an instant, there were several muffled sounds of corpses falling to the ground from all directions in the square. A dozen elite Dainglu soldiers, each holding a sword, appeared above the house and surrounded more than 100 people in the small square. The person who can become the core figure of Da Ying Tower may not be a military leader, but he is definitely the top tycoon in the world. Almost all of them are wanted criminals on the Jiazino and have a great reputation in the world. As all the main forces of Dainglu showed up, the faces of the Tang family disciples present gradually lost their color and gathered in the middle, turning from an encircling offensive to a defensive one. Song Ying stood on the Panlong screen wall and looked around. He traveled all the way from Chang'an to Yuzhou, not just for the Tang family. He had been harassing the Criminal Investigation Department for many years by attacking the Yinglu and was the most serious problem of the Criminal Investigation Department. The purpose of his coming was to eradicate this scourge in one fell swoop. Although the people present were all tough gangsters with names, the host Li Hansheng was not among them. If Li Hansheng, the rebel leader, was not brought to justice, it would be meaningless to kill more thugs. Pei Huaying of Kowloon Walled City, Xiao Methraya Wangmi, Taoist Zoning of Moving Mountain, there are quite a few people here, why didn't Li Hansheng come out? Zhu Liuji and Feng pointed diagonally at the ground and said calmly. If you want to see Li Hansheng, you have to pass my test first. Song Ying nodded and raised the sword in his hand. Kill. Promise. In an instant, the elite wolf guards hiding among the Tang family's disciples drew out their weapons and rushed towards the nearby Dainglu bandits. Mr. Pei stood on a high place and said loudly, the Tang family has brought trouble to the world for many years. They have betrayed their trust and harmed their brothers and sisters. Now I am attacking Yinglu to eliminate this great harm to the world. If you dare to obstruct the process of treating everyone equally, kill them. No one will be spared. Kill. Many heroes in Daying Tower jumped from the high-walled buildings. In the huge Tang Jiazhuang, swords flashed everywhere in an instant, and the shouts of killing shook the sky. Zulu single-handedly struck a sword, transformed into a white rainbow, and rushed straight towards Tang Jiao and his son, who were standing under the martial arts stage. The sword energy soared into the sky in the small square, and even the calm wind and snow were disturbed by the sword wind and sword wind. Tang Jiao was self-aware, and when he saw Zulu coming to kill him, he didn't even have the desire to fight. He raised his sword and rushed to the left, pounced on an Eagle Tower master who was killing the Tang family's children. Song Ying Yanling's sword was half an inch out of its sheath, but her figure did not move, just staring at Zulu's every move. Zulu came to take revenge, and his target was naturally Tang Jiao. He was approaching with lightning speed, but before he could rush to the martial arts stage, a black shadow jumped out from the corner of the martial arts stage in a blind spot, and threw himself at his feet with a ferocious smile. Cut off both legs with 2 knives. First pick up the young masters. Cha. Yin Tong, the Kui family's chief retainer who had been famous for many years, didn't even finish shouting a word before he was transformed into more than a dozen pieces of rotten flesh under the rusty iron sword, and fell to pieces on the snow. Zulu didn't even pause, and in the blink of an eye he was behind the Tang family's father and son. Tang Xiao, who was running at full speed, looked back and saw that Yin Tong turned into corpses without even finishing his sentence. He was shocked, and his face also showed a bit of panic. The long sword in his hand was unsheathed, and he was in danger. He blocked Zulu's sword that was stabbed like the fangs of the poisonous snake, and said urgently, Master Song. Song Ying was shocked when she saw Yin Tong being killed instantly in the blink of an eye. However, the Tang family was, after all, the court's front in the world. If he was killed in front of him, the emperor would definitely be angry. She stepped lightly on the dragon screen wall with her feet. The whole person rose into the sky, and a knife fell in front of Zulu. Ding ding ding. A string of sparks burst out from the snowy night. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 509. Hearing the fight in Tangjiazhuang, many people in the martial arts world jumped onto the high wall. Although they did not dare to intervene, they watched from the high wall. Facing a strong enemy, the Tang family did not care. Song Ying traveled around the world to shock the martial arts world. He was already the strongest fighter in the investigation department. As a government official, he was not on the list of martial arts champions, but his skills were definitely not comparable to those of Tang Xiao, a martial arts champion. All the people in the martial arts world were attracted by this fight, which might be the highest level in the martial arts world. They stared at the martial arts stage on a snowy night, but could not see the movements of the two people at all. Stones flew everywhere and bricks exploded. Song Ying held a goose feather knife and fought with Zulu for 100 times in a blink of an eye. Both of them were unscathed, but the ground and the walls on both sides were full of sword wounds. The martial arts stage next to him collapsed a corner in the blink of an eye. The flash of swords and sabers left no living creatures within a radius of 3 feet. Tang Jiao wanted to join hands with Song Ying to kill Zulu with his sword in hand, but seeing this scene, he couldn't even insert the sword, so he had to continue to retreat with his 2 sons. The contemporary sword saint is not in vain. Zulu had a blood feud, and in his rage, the sword in his hand had turned into a phantom, and everything within 3 steps in front of him was crushed to dust. After Song Ying connected several moves, his face became more and more serious, and he was gradually overwhelmed. He was forced to the martial arts stage, and everything he stepped on was cracked. Seeing that there was no way to retreat, Song Ying shouted angrily, used the knife as a sword, and used the Cao family sword signature skill Dragon Gate 3 knocks, and the 3 swords almost pierced Zulu's forehead, throat, and heart at the same time. The Cao family sword focuses on speed, and is the fastest among the 4 major sword families. Even the Tang family sword, which borrowed from the Cao family and formed its own school, can only look up to it. The practice of 3 knocks at Dragon Gate is perfected, and it emphasizes 3 swords come out at the same time, and the dragon roars. When 3 swords are sent out, only 1 sword breaks the wind. The instantaneous explosive power is unmatched in the world, and almost no one can dodge it at the same time. Although Song Ying has changed his sword to a knife when he travels in the martial arts world, he is a genius with extraordinary talent. He has already mastered the Cao family sword to perfection. This 3 knocks at Dragon Gate is so fast that it seems to the onlookers that only 1 move was made, but 3 knife tips appeared in front of Zulu. The Zhu family sword emphasizes stability and never takes shortcuts. It is famous for its accuracy. In terms of speed, it is definitely not as fast as the Cao family sword. If you encounter this killer move in close combat, you will definitely suffer. But the reason why Zulu was driven out of the house by the old swordsman is that Zulu does not like the Zhu family sword. After wandering alone in the martial arts world, he has never learned this old-fashioned thing. Zulu has only done one thing in his more than 10 years of seclusion, learning all the martial arts in the world, removing the dross and retaining the essence into sword moves, and then integrating hundreds of sword moves and refining them into one sword, the most perfect sword in the world. The former sword saint Liu Beiming was deprived of the title of sword saint by a sword, and it was this sword he used. This sword was taught to Zhu Manzi, which is what Ning Yu called Zhongping sword evolved from Zhongping spear. This evaluation is too unprofessional. The reason why it is like Zhongping spear is that Zhongping spear also follows the simplest and most practical routine, without any fancy front and back moves. A spear thrust is unstoppable, so there is the saying Zhongping spear, the king of spears, the most difficult to defend in the middle. It's a pity that Man Zi didn't do his job to practice swordsmanship, and didn't learn this sword at all, but even so, he could use a branch to poke into the wall more than an inch. The original name of this sword was Shake the Mountain, which meant to shake Zhuzhou Mountain. Unfortunately, the old swordsman never saw his son use the sword that could destroy his life's achievements. It was a blessing or a curse. Song Ying was obviously lucky, because today he saw with his own eyes what a swordsman was, and became the target of this famous sword. Zulu held the sword in one hand, and at the moment when Song Ying used the Dragon Gate 3 knocks, he simply thrust the long sword straight out. Under the Panlong wall, the dragon roared suddenly. The sword was handed out, directly shattering the sleeves and robes, and all the rust on the blade was shaken off, turning the originally rusty iron sword into a silver blade that was snow white. Song Ying's eyes suddenly changed, with a bit of disbelief. He wanted to put away the sword and defend himself, but he had no spare strength at all. He watched the other party gather strength, attack, and the sword came in front of him. The movements were smooth and indestructible, and he didn't even have a chance to dodge. Bang! After a sharp and loud sound, the Panlong stone wall exploded, and a huge gap appeared. The broken stones pierced the doors and windows of the hall behind. Several Tang family members who were hiding behind the stone wall died on the spot without even screaming. The terrifying momentum shocked all the people in the chaos. They all turned their heads to look at the martial arts stage and even forgot to fight. Tang Jiao stared with wide eyes and stood there in a daze, opening his mouth but saying nothing. The small square with snow and murderous auras suddenly became silent. After Zhu Liu's sword, Zhan stood there, and the sword still trembled. This is the power of the sword saint. It's just that this sword, which represents the highest level of contemporary swordsmanship, did not tear Song Ying into pieces after it was stabbed out. In the silent square, everyone looked at the martial arts stage. Song Ying held the knife to his chest, with cold sweat on his forehead. He could clearly see the goose feather knife trembling slightly as he finished speaking. He was relieved to have survived the disaster. Beside Song Ying, there was an old man in a red robe. His dry fingers grabbed Song Ying's shoulders. He appeared at some point, as if he was standing there. The old man in the red robe had a bit of appreciation in his calm eyes. His hoarse duck voice sounded, and the voice reached everyone's ears. Good sword, worthy of being the son of Zhu Zhoushan, he didn't let our family down. Eunuch Chia. The expressions of everyone in Dainglu changed slightly. When they saw this old eunuch who had been guarding the king for a period of time actually appearing here, they knew something was wrong. Eunuch Chia must have come here to deal with Li Hansheng. At this time, Li Hansheng had already gone to Bodhi Island. Although everyone present was the elite in the building, they could only deal with the Tiankui camp wolf guards and the masters invited by the Tang family. When they met Song Ying, such a top tycoon can only be dealt with by Zulu. Zhu Liufang was able to destroy Song Ying, but he was rescued by Eunuch Chia. Once the killing move came out, the opponent would be wary and it would be difficult to kill Song Ying again. In addition, Eunuch Chia himself, the chance of winning was almost non-existent. If Zulu lay down, I'm afraid everyone present will die from this. Mr. Pei retreated to the house and spoke without hesitation. Mukuro, let's go. After hearing this, everyone in Dainglu immediately jumped onto the high wall of the building in order to preserve the combat power of Dainglu, while the Tang family and Wolf Guard also chased after them. Zulu held the long sword, frowned and looked at Eunuch Chia and Song Ying, and then glanced at Tang Jiao in the distance. Eunuch Chia sighed softly, shook his head and said, "Our family is old and we don't go out many times. Now that you show up, you can't leave today. In fact, it's not easy for your father to leave a trace of incense. He knows that this trip is very dangerous, so he shouldn't take the risk. Zulu stood with his sword in hand and frowned. I heard that my father-in-law asked for love from the emperor back then. Eunuch Jia nodded, that's right. Our family cherishes talents and asks for a lot of favors. Don't keep it in mind. Don't make waves when you use the sword later. Use it more steadily. If you kill our family, you might still be able to get out alive. Zulu took a breath and raised his hand gently. You go. Mr. Pei naturally didn't want the top combat power of Eagle Tower to die here, but their group of helpers could only clean up the surrounding fish, and they had no chance of winning against Song Ying, let alone Eunuch Jia. To prevent being caught in one fell swoop, he could only grit his teeth and say, escape if you can, don't fight. Let's go. As soon as he finished speaking, everyone in Daying Tower dispersed in all directions, and the Wolf Guard and the Tang family disciples also chased them from behind. Tang Jiao finally breathed a sigh of relief at this time, and bravely came to the martial arts stage with his sword in hand, blocking Zuliu's retreat. Song Ying's eyes were a little more fearful, and she moved the knife to the left, ready to attack. Eunuch Jia stood in the center of the martial arts stage with his hands in his sleeves, without any aura on his body, quietly waiting for Zulu to draw his sword. Zulu had no expression on his face, his eyes locked on Eunuch Jia in front of him, his sword blade motionless. The entire Tang family seemed to freeze at this moment, even the breathing and snowflakes were still, leaving only 4 figures standing under the collapsed 9-dragon wall. The people in the arena who were watching around did not even dare to show their anger. The eyes of the older generation who knew Zulu showed some worry, but they were helpless. Snap! The candle in an unknown lantern burned unevenly and made a slight popping sound. The next moment, Zuliu's figure suddenly disappeared on the martial arts stage. The bright sword blade picked up the wind and snow and went straight towards Tang Jiao, who was standing under the martial arts stage. Tang Jiao trembled with fright. The long sword had already been unsheathed. Before he could use the Tang family sword that he had learned all his life, Zulu was already in front of him. Just because Tang Jiao couldn't react, it didn't mean that he couldn't do anything else. Song Ying and Eunuch Jia moved at the same time, ducking under the martial arts stage. Different from Song Ying's astonishing aura, Eunuch Jia looked like a ghost. He didn't make a sound, but he reached Zuliu's side first. He raised his sleeves and waved lightly. His sleeves wrapped around the sword blade. He flicked his fingers, and a golden thread stirred the sword. It shot out and pierced Zuliu's throat. The long sword in Zuliu's hand was like mud flowing into the sea, without any feedback. He immediately twisted the edge of the sword and tried to smash the sleeve robe, but the long sword was like a fallen leaf that couldn't be shaken off, without any sense of force. Seeing the golden thread coming in front of him, Zulu turned around to dodge, tapped his toes on the ground, and jumped up a little before he could barely avoid it. The golden wire did not retract or fall to the ground. It passed across the square silently and did not stop until it pierced a pillar on the side. Eunuch Jia's left sleeve rolled up the blade of the sword, and he raised the sleeve with his right hand and waved it out. The wide-sleeved robe fell on Zuliu's blocking arm. It seemed weak, but it pushed Zuliu's whole body away. Zulu took advantage of the situation to withdraw his sword and move back, but Song Ying had already appeared behind him, with the blade like a shadow, slashing at various parts of Zuliu's body. Boom! In the night, there was suddenly a soft sound like a strong bow being fully drawn. Zulu raised his sword and stabbed Song Ying. Halfway through the sword, his movements suddenly stopped, as if he was being forcibly grabbed by something. Looking up, he saw that the iron sword was wrapped around 3 golden wires. Under the force of the sword, the golden wires were pulled straight, bending the straight edge of the sword. Standing on the spot, Eunuch Jia flicked the golden wire in his hand, and 3 strings sounded in the night. The golden wire turned into a sharp blade and hit Zuliu's arm holding the sword, leaving 3 bloody wounds. The movement of drawing the sword was interrupted. Song Ying's blade did not wait and struck Zhu Liu's chest without hesitation. The long sword was restricted. Zhu Liuwei had no choice but to abandon the sword, clamp the blade between his palms, and kick Song Ying's wrist with his toes, trying to seize the weapon. But Eunuchjia's palm turned slightly, and the long sword pulled back by the golden thread spun in the air, directly cutting towards Zhu Liu's neck. Two fists are no match for four hands. Faced with the ghostly tactics of Eunuchjia and Song Ying, Zhu Liu is obviously overwhelmed. The two powers are at odds with each other, so he can only fight with Song Ying's sword, and once again raises his hand to hold the spinning hand. Hilt. Essay. At this critical moment, there was a sudden explosion in the small square, and a long spear with dragon patterns pierced the sky and shot out from the night. Like a crossbow arrow, it pierced Song Ying beside Zhu Liu. The incident happened suddenly and Song Ying was caught off guard. Under the terrifying power, Song Ying's face suddenly changed, and he immediately raised his sword to split the long spear. The long spear was so powerful that it was nailed into the stone slab of the martial arts stage for nearly 2 feet before it stopped. The spear shaft was still buzzing. If it was inserted into the body, it might be shot through. Song Ying was furious. Who is this villain? Zhu Liu grabbed the hilt of the sword, took advantage of the momentum and jumped onto the martial arts stage, pulling hard to try to break the gold thread on the blade. And Jia Gong Gong, holding 3 gold threads in his left hand, looked at the source of the long spear. Many people in the martial arts world who were watching had long been shocked by the 3 people's miraculous skills. When they were sweating for Zhu Liu, they saw someone dared to help, and they were all shocked and fortunate. They looked in the direction of the long spear, wanting to see which hero was willing to die. In the snow, on the watchtower beside the high wall, a handsome young man in white clothes appeared. The young man in white clothes was carrying a sword and a knife on his back, and was jumping down from the 3-meter-high building. When he arrived, his loud voice was heard by everyone first. Tang Xiao. Return my master's mother's life. The words were filled with rage. After landing, his body was like a thunder, and he killed Tang Xiao who was standing on the side without saying anything. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 510. The long night is not over yet, and the dawn has not yet risen. Su Buling and Man Zi rode a horse together, galloped on the official road, and arrived at Tangjiazhuang near Chin County in the early morning. Returning to the small town where he grew up, Ning Yuhi's gentle cheeks showed a bit of sadness. He must have remembered every bit of life with his mother when he was a child. The hatred in Kinkan's eyes became deeper and deeper until he grew up. When I entered the street, I was even a little hesitant. However, there are more than 100 members of the Tang family, and there are many brothers and sisters who have taken care of each other when they were young. No matter how much Ning Yuhi hated Tang Xiao, he could not just sit back and watch Zhu Liu kill all these innocent people. After hesitating for a while, he still followed Su Buletinling, entered Zhuangzi, crossed the long street, and arrived at the gate of the Tang family. All the restaurants and tea shops in the town were open, but there was no one inside, even the waiters were missing. There was a crowd of people under the high wall of the Tang family. Many people climbed up the high wall using ropes and ladders to check the situation inside. The shouts of killing also came from the village. Knowing that Zhu Liu had taken action, Su Buletinling did not go over openly and jumped up to the house on the side of the long street with Manji. He stopped at the top of a tall building and looked at the situation behind the high wall. The high wall was a mess of swords and sword shadows, and many people were lying in a pool of blood, but no one cared. Everyone focused on the martial arts stage. As soon as Su Buling settled on the roof of the building, Zhu Manzi became excited and pointed to a figure on the martial arts stage. My dad. There, there. Ning Yuhi's eyes were also filled with nervousness. It was pitch dark and he couldn't clearly see the battle situation with just the lanterns and torches inside. When he stood on tiptoes to check, a loud bang suddenly came out and the panlong wall behind the martial arts stage exploded. A gap. Boom. Such a terrifying momentum shocked Su Buling. Before he could admire the power of the sword master, he saw Eunuch Jia standing on the martial arts stage. Why is Eunuch Jia here? Su Buling's face was slightly startled. Although he had never fought with Eunuch Jia, he was a person who could protect the emperor in the palace for a long time. He was definitely not a vain person. If he teamed up with Song Ying of the Criminal Investigation Department, Zulu would definitely suffer. Sure enough, after Eunuch Jia appeared, the people in Dainglu who were fighting behind the high wall dispersed. Wolfguard and the Tang family disciples went to chase them, while Zulu stayed where they were. Zhu Manzi met Eunuch Jia in Chang'an, and when he saw his father clinging to the martial arts stage, he suddenly became anxious. What happened? Why didn't my father run away? He can't beat Eunuch Jia. Song Ying and Eunuch Jia are surrounding one person. It's difficult to escape. After all, he was his father-in-law. Su Buling hesitated and wanted to go and help. But Ningyu he was still conscious. He grabbed Su Buling and said urgently. You are the crown prince of Su, how can you help the traitor Zulu to deal with Eunuch Jia? If the emperor finds out, you will be doomed. This statement obviously makes sense. Su Buling is the prince of the feudal lord and is loyal to the court. Eunuch Jia and Song Ying are now looking for the rebels. If Su Buling runs out to help Zulu rescue the siege, he will be labeled as colluding with the rebels and intending to commit rebellion. He will not be able to clear his name even if he jumps into the Yellow River. Su Buletanling knew this and came here just to watch with Ningyu he, lest Zulu kill all his relatives and friends as well. He guessed that the Tang family would invite experts to take charge, but he didn't expect that it would be Eunuch Jia. Now the situation was reversed. Instead of Zulu destroying the family, Zulu was here soon. He held Manzi in his arms. Su Buling said that no matter what, he would not let Manzi watch his father die in front of him. Just at this moment of hesitation, a fight broke out below. Eunuch Jia and Song Ying joined forces, one soft and the other strong, complementing each other. There is almost nothing in the world that can stop them. Although Zulu was excellent in martial arts, he was still at a disadvantage in an instant, and his sword-holding arm was severely injured. Seeing that the situation was not good, Su Buling knew that this battle would bring bad luck to the six, so he didn't care too much. He held a long spear and shot at Song Ying. At the same time, he flew up, jumped up to the high wall watchtower, and jumped down from the watchtower. The dignified prince of the feudal lord must not be confused with the rebels, but that does not mean that the prince of the feudal lord cannot avenge his master's blood. Su Buling cleared his mind in an instant, and with overwhelming anger, he rushed directly to Tang Xiao, who was standing in a daze near the martial arts stage. Tang Xiao, return your life to my master and mother. The words were a bit hard to pronounce, but they were so powerful that they shocked the crowds of people watching on the high wall. Tang Xiao, who was paying close attention to the situation nervously, shrank his neck in shock, thinking that Li Hanzhong was coming to kill him, and quickly turned his head with his sword in hand. Unexpectedly, he saw the young master of 200,000 cavalrymen from the northwest rushing over with murderous intent. This damn person might as well be Li Hanzhong. Tang Jiao knew the right thing to do, and when he used the knife on the prince of the feudal lord, he even had to put his neck under the knife edge. He didn't even need to do it himself, and he could justifiably take off his head. Tang Jiao quickly put away his sword and retreated hastily. Little prince. Why are you here? Su Buling had a furious look on his face and ignored Eunuch Jia and Zulu who were near the martial arts stage. He glared at Tang Jiao and said coldly. Tang Jiao, you thief, you dare to kill my master's mother. Since I came to Yuzhu, if I don't take your life, how can I have the dignity to go back and face my master and take my life? Su Buring pulled out the sword Zhao Dan from his waist, stepped on the ground with both feet, smashed the bricks and stones, and rushed to Tang Jiao in the blink of an eye. Although the excuse is false, Wu Kui's strength is real. Su Buling said that killing Tang Jiao without getting close might be a bit exaggerated, but to destroy Tang Jiao, the shame of Wu Kui, it really doesn't take much effort. If you get close, you will die, and you probably won't even have a chance to fight back. Tang Jiao had seen Su Buling's inhuman brutality in the Wangjiangtai dragon slaying. Facing Su Buling, who was now one of the 10 martial champions, he had no intention of fighting and did not dare to fight back. He was so frightened that his face turned pale and he retreated in a hurry. The sudden change shocked everyone. The Jianghu people watching on the high wall were shocked by Su Buling's almost exaggerated catapult start. They were all confused about who this young handsome man was. Song Ying was also a little confused. He didn't know why Su Buling suddenly came to the Tang family and rescued Zulu. Was he going to rebel openly? However, no matter what the reason was, Tang Jiao was the face of the court to the outside world. If he was not disloyal to the court, he would definitely not watch him being hacked to death. Seeing this, Eunuch Jia loosened the golden thread in his hand, flashed from the martial arts stage like a ghost, came to Tang Jiao, raised 2 fingers to clamp Su Buling's sword, and with his right hand, lightly sent Su Buling back to his original position, then bowed and saluted. "Your Highness, calm down. My family and Lord Song are arresting the traitor. For the sake of the reputation of the prince, please don't interfere in this matter." Su Buling seemed to have just recognized Eunuch Jia, and pointed his long sword at the ground with a bit of surprise in his eyes. "Eunuch Jia? Why are you here?" He then looked at Song Ying under the martial arts stage. "Why is Lord Song here too? Is the Wolf Guard doing something?" Song Ying, who was almost shot dead, had a slightly gloomy expression and said in a cold voice, "I am with Eunuch Jia to capture the rebel Zulu." "Why did the prince help this rebel? If there is no reasonable explanation." "Is there?" Su Buling looked puzzled, moved his eyes to Zulu who was standing with a sword, and raised his eyebrows slightly. "Just now, I was in a mess and threw a shot casually to boost my momentum. I didn't notice that it was Lord Song. It's really the Sword Saint Zulu. I saw him once at Cao's house last time. It's been a long time." Zulu's sword was entangled by the golden thread, and his eyes were on Eunuch Jia, ignoring his son-in-law. Song Ying frowned, thinking that Su Buling was lying with his eyes open, and he must have shot him on purpose just now. However, Zulu was from the Eagle Tower and could not be related to the Northwest Su King. Su Buling's status and position did not need to be related to the Eagle Tower. Song Ying thought about it and could only assume that Su Buling was resentful of the emperor's trap and deliberately made trouble for him, the court's lackey. Song Ying suppressed his anger and raised his hand to salute. "Your Highness has no right to interfere in the affairs of the detective department. If you don't help, please leave quickly. If you let Sword Saint Zulu go, this matter will be reported to the Emperor's study tomorrow." "What should I ask about?" Su Buling frowned slightly and glanced at Song Ying. "It has nothing to do with me if you catch the rebels, just do it." Seeing that Su Buling had no intention of intervening, Song Ying approached Zulu again with a knife. Eunuch Jia, who was standing between the few people, frowned slightly, hesitated, saluted with a smile, and then walked towards the martial arts stage. "Tang Jiao, give me your life." At this moment, Su Buling broke out and rushed towards Tang Jiao again. Eunuch Jia knew this would happen, so he spread his sleeves to stop Su Buling and nodded slightly. "Your Highness, it's hard for us to do things if you do this." Song Ying also became angry and said coldly, "Your Highness Su, what are you thinking of obstructing my investigation department from doing things?" The many Jianghu people watching on the high wall were also confused, not understanding why this dignified prince of a vassal state suddenly started a fight with his own people in the court. Su Buling acted innocent, spread his hands and said, "Sir Song, my teacher is Neng Yuhi from Changqing Temple. Tang Jiao killed Ning Yuhi's mother. Tang Jiao said in a deep voice, she ran away from marriage without permission. You have the right to speak. Su Buling's eyes were slightly cold, and he turned his head. Ning Yuhi ran away from marriage, what does it have to do with her mother? Killing innocent people without permission can be beheaded according to the law. Do you want to settle it publicly or privately? If it's public, let Sir Song investigate the case thoroughly and I will supervise it. If it's private, it's natural for me to avenge my master. Choose one yourself. Tang Jiao was speechless by this. Who in the martial arts world doesn't have a few lives on his hands? If you count it this way, there won't be many innocent people in the entire Yuzhu martial arts world. How can he explain it? Song Ying was also a little speechless. After all, it was the government office. Tang Jiao killed his family members, and according to the law, he could handle it. He couldn't just say, this is a matter of the underworld, and it has nothing to do with the court, otherwise, he would be dragged into the ditch. Faced with Su Buling's exaggeration, Song Ying hesitated and said in a deep voice. It's an old case that has been going on for many years, and it is difficult to investigate thoroughly. Then don't investigate it. Su Buling pointed his sword at the ground and looked at Tang Jiao coldly. Master's blood revenge is my blood revenge. Once a teacher, always a father. It is natural for a son to avenge his father. Even if you put it in the government office, you are considered a hero. I will avenge my master today and only kill Tang Jiao. Even if you report me to the emperor, I have a clear conscience and am willing to be punished. You catch your traitors, I avenge mine, and don't blame me for being ruthless if you interfere again. You. Song Ying's face was furious, staring at Su Buling, but he could do nothing.